They call me many things stray, shadow, nuisance, but I prefer the quiet between names. The small pause when a door is almost shut, and the world is still deciding which side you belong to. Sit with me on the rail where the rain beads like little eyes, and I will tell you about Coraline Jones and the house that tried to be two houses at once. I watched her from warm roof tiles and from hedges both trimmed and unruly. A cat sees differently. We do not mistake a welcome mat for a welcome, nor a lock for safety, nor a smile for kindness. What we trust is the seam between things. The moment a key hesitates, the instant a room exhales its dust, the hush before a child decides to be brave. The house was called the Pink Palace, though the paint had weathered into the colour of old ham beneath kitchen light. It carried its age like a heavy coat. A porch that creaked in several dialects, windows that squinted at the mildest sun, floorboards that commented under every step. It held 3 households at once, which is an ambitious act for a building. In the attic rooms lived the old man with the mica. He called himself Mr. Bobo, and I will not argue with a human who feeds his tenants peanuts and praise. Downstairs lived Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, veteran actresses who kept tea strong, stories stronger, and a cupboard full of costumes that still smelled of applause. Between them, in the half-floor with a small bedroom overlooking the garden, lived Coraline and her parents. Clever people whose cleverness often kept them busy enough to miss when the house blinked. Coraline noticed, though, she was a curious child, which is another way of saying she stayed awake when the adults preferred to sleep. She counted things that did not know they were being counted. Windows, steps, doors within doors. She tried keys that did not quite fit, because not quite is the most interesting measurement. On wet afternoons, when the sky misplaced its instructions, she explored, and I followed at a distance that was simultaneously near. A cat and a curious child understand each other without agreement. We walk parallel to the same question. There was a small door in the drawing room behind the sofa, hinged like an answer. Coraline found children are tuned to the frequencies of hidden things. Her mother fetched a ring of keys that chimed like thin coins in a shallow pocket. After several tries, the lock unclasped with polite reluctance. The door opened onto bricks. Her mother was pleased. It meant the world was tidy. Coraline was less convinced. She touched the wall, and I watched the way her face learned something it could not yet say. The house had offered a contradiction and expected her to be satisfied. Up in the attic, a window shrieked as it moved, and Mr. Bobo leaned into the wind to report that his mice had a message for the girl. Mice make passable messengers. Their handwriting is poor, but their sincerity is sharp. "Don't go through the door," he told her. "Advice is a peculiar food. Children seldom digest it the way adults intend." Coraline tested the words as if they were a code. "Don't go through the door" felt suspiciously like, there is a door worth going through. Her parents loved her, certainly, but love sometimes sounds like "I'm busy." "We'll see," and "Why don't you explore?" These phrases are not untrue. They are only untimely. Coraline explored in the way children do when no one schedules their curiosity. She mapped the garden, gave temporary names to plants the neighbours had allowed to overgrow, and learned the house's night noises, the hum, the tick, the sigh-huntil. Each sounded like a sentence with a missing verb. I padded after her, practicing the ancient discipline of looking without staring. Thresholds do better with witnesses, and I am a connoisseur of thresholds. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, wrapped in cardigans and memory, pressed into Coraline's palm a small grey stone with a hole clean through its middle. A good tool, though no one explained why. It looked like an eye that had simplified itself. Coraline held it up and peered through at the garden, and the garden obligingly rearranged its shadows. Seeing less can be a method for seeing more. This is a trick cats know by heart. The house did not care for the trick. It shifted on its foundations as if it had remembered an appointment. Evenings in the Pink Palace accumulate like lint soft and ordinary until you notice the glitter. Rain dimmed to drizzle. The drawing-room swallowed its own reflection. Coraline returned to the little door. Locks are creatures of habit, but boredom undermines loyalty. A key that ignored yesterday's plea will sometimes listen today. She turned the right key, and the latch sighed. When the door swung open this time, there was no brick wall. There was a corridor, narrowing dutifully, its paper printed with a pattern that did not repeat the way honest patterns do. It smelled faintly of sugar taught to behave. People imagine cats are cautious. We are simply unembarrassed by curiosity. I did not tell her not to go, because telling a curious child not to explore is like telling weather not to happen. Coraline looked over her shoulder. I answered with a slow blink the old language of reassurance. If you have ever stood at the entrance to a story and felt its breath on your face, you know her expression. Amazement dressed as inevitability. She went on hands and knees. The passage smoothed itself beneath her like a tongue. I kept to the skirting board on our side, moving parallel to her path, because there are always two sides until there are not. From the far end came a suggestion of warm light, the kind that tries to sell you certainty. I do not trust warm light. It flatters your fur. It promises laps without claws. Yet even I felt the pull. Narrators at this point like to issue warnings, to tell you that choices have costs. Very well, choices have costs. The interesting thing is who pays them. Coraline crawled, steady and practical, as if she were simply crossing the long carpet rather than the hinge of a world. Before she vanished into elsewhere, I brushed my whiskers along the little door's frame. It is my habit to leave a signature where paths turn strange, a breadcrumb legible only to creatures who read with their faces. Perhaps that is why I could follow her later. Or perhaps the fierce geometry of a determined child draws roads no sensible mapmaker would approve, and even a cat must admit the line is beautiful. If you have ever moved to a new home and apprenticed yourself to its sounds, the fridge's private ocean, the sulking of the pipes, the gossip of curtains, you know how belonging is assembled from patient listening. Coraline was mid-apprenticeship. Given time, she would have learned the ordinary magic of normal days. But the world offered her a different curriculum, a sudden course in fear and resourcefulness. She accepted without ceremony because she mistook her own bravery for ordinary stubbornness. Stubbornness, when guided, is simply courage wearing work clothes. But we still wonder whether the doors in our own lives open because we need escape, or because something on the other side needs us to visit. That is a heavy question, and heavy questions are best carried with both hands. So here is something lighter, the comfort of a mug left warm on the table when you return from the hall, the small victory of a dry patch on a wet bench, the way a cat will sit near enough to keep you company and far enough to let you pretend you are alone. These are not spells in the theatrical sense, but they are enchantments all the same. Coraline had a pocketful of such enchantments and did not yet know their names. This is how it began. Rain, a ring of keys, a child who refused to be bored, and a cat who dislikes pretending that doors are only furniture. If you keep listening, I will follow her into the place where names are stitched differently and manners are as neat as needlework and just as sharp. Every story needs a witness. I, who prefer the quiet between names, will be yours. On the morning after the corridor first pretended to be bricks, and then admitted it was a corridor, the Pink Palace practiced being ordinary. Houses do this after a night of mischief. They polish the ordinary like silver and set it out where everyone can see it. A milk carton sweated politely on the kitchen table. Coraline's mother typed with the focus of someone threading a needle in a moving carriage, and her father assembled a lunch that believed itself more interesting than it was. I took my breakfast elsewhere. The hedge by the sagging fence where birds hold their committee meetings and leave crumbs of argument on the ground. Coraline tried to tell them children always try first to tell the people who love them. Her mother glanced up with that concerned half-listen adults practice when their minds are divided into calendars. "A brick wall, darling?" she said, as if bricks were a hobby. Her father asked sensible questions about drafts and mice and the way old houses change their minds in damp weather. Sensible questions have a way of missing the point with grace. The more practical the inquiry, the less willing the mystery is to answer. Coraline let the words go. She ate her lunch courageously because sometimes a parent's cooking requires moral fibre. Then she announced she would go exploring, which is a child's synonym for deciding not to be ignored by the world. I went with her, of course, in the complicated way cats go with anyone, adjacent, aloof, and absolutely present. We crossed the yard where the grass had become a crowd of thin green sighs. Beyond that lay the part of the garden that belonged to memory more than to maintenance. The rhododendrons rehearsed melodrama behind a veil of cobwebs. The old well hid its mouth under boards that remembered the weight of winter. Coraline counted steps, then lost count, then invented a better system, which is how explorers improve reality. She took the small grey stone with the whole Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's odd gift from her pocket, and peered through it at the path, the way you test a spyglass you suspect of being a moral instrument. The actresses were on their porch, plucking lint from a basket of costumes as if grooming extinct pets. Their voices matched and contradicted each other like affectionate twins. They called Coraline Caroline, which is a habit names adopt when adults are sentimental. Miss Spink offered tea that tasted like conversation. Miss Forcible offered sweets that tasted like applause. They spoke of the theatre at the end of the pier, of dogs who had played lead roles with great dignity, and of accidents that continued to be marvellous decades after they ceased to be dangerous. "Mind the well," they said, almost together, "and keep that stone handy." They would have read Coraline's future in tea leaves if the kettle had cooperated. I sat between rosebush and railing, allowing a sun patch to claim me while keeping one ear for the mice in the attic. Mr. Bobo, up there in his top-floor kingdom, had been training his mice into the idea of a circus. This is not the most foolish notion humans have entertained, Hurst. The mice had opinions on drums, trumpets and flags, and they broadcast those opinions in tiny syllables that most ears file under noise. I speak enough mouse to get by. Their message ribbed at the edges of every squeak. Don't go through the door, not because doors are wicked in generals. Mall creatures value exits, but because this door led not to safety, but to a deception tidy as stitching. Mr. Bobo relayed their warning when he saw Coraline at the stairwell. He leaned over the banister so far that I could smell peanuts and rain in his sweater. The mice say it is not for you, he told her, eyes round with the seriousness that comes easily to the lonely. He meant well. The well was busy being something else nearby, and did not comment. That afternoon tried for normal. Coraline's mother took her to buy school clothes that would have cheerfully crushed the spirit of a less stubborn child. The shop's lights hummed like patient insects. The mirrors manufactured new angles of dislike. Coraline practiced the polite resistance children learn from chairs. She sat where she had not been invited to and looked comfortable. Back home, her father attempted cuisine. The meal smelled experimental and tasted like the minutes you wait outside a locked bathroom. Coraline ate just enough to prove she was brave. I shared her water glass because civilization is a shared bowl. But the house would not stay quiet. Pink Palace had a way of rattling a window when it wanted attention, like a throat clearing. When the rain started again, the drawing room lowered its eyelids and pretended to be mysterious by accident. Coraline returned, as I knew she would, to the small door behind the sofa. She did not rush. Children who are serious do not run toward what frightens them. They approach as if it were a cat who might bolt. She turned the key with her whole hand knuckles, courage, intention. The lock hesitated, not from age, but from etiquette. It is rude to deliver a child directly to danger. Nevertheless, it yielded. Where bricks had been before, there was now that same narrow corridor. Obedient and incorrect. I nosed the threshold. Air has flavours beyond the usual catalogues, Alt. Smoke, damp, sun-warm stone. This air had the sweetness of things that have been practised too thoroughly. Imagine laughter rehearsed until it creaks. Imagine a smile sharpened to a tool. That was the taste. Coraline looked back. I gave her the slow blink again, which is not permission, so much as companionship. She went on her knees and elbows, moving with a child's careful recklessness, and the passage padded itself under her like a host, laying out rugs. The other side, though we had not yet earned the right to call it that, presented itself as a duplicate with all the boredom ironed out. The wallpaper remembered to be cheerful. The skirting boards minded their manners. The air had a domestic shine, the way a showroom breathes. I remained in our house, where the shadows were honest, but parallel is a form of proximity. The cat you think you see at the corner of your eye when you are doing something you should not that was me, keeping pace along the seam. Coraline found a kitchen arranged to admire itself, a table set for delight, a bowl of fruit that had memorized colour, a window through which the garden performed obedience. And there, preparing a meal that smelled like stories about meals, stood a woman with Coraline's mother's shape, but not her mother's hands. These hands were neat as new scissors. Her smile was stitched into itself. It behaved so well it frightened me. In her face, where eyes belong, were two black buttons, not eyes pretending to be buttons, but buttons practiced at being eyes. She told Coraline she had been expected. That word does heavy lifting in the mouths of monsters. Expectations can be cages with lace on them. A cat's opinion is a private instrument, but I tuned mine to warning. Still, I did not leap and hiss. Hissing is theatrics. A creature like this one wears theatre as armour. Better to watch for the thread that gathers a web. Coraline ate some of the meal enough to be polite, not enough to make promises. She listened to the voice that had borrowed authority from mothers and borrowed charm from television. The house on that side kept putting itself in order the way a magician makes coins appear, too regularly. When she returned, because children do come back when the world allows it, it was late and earlier at once. The corridor unrolled like a tongue, admitting nothing. Coraline shut the door. The lock accepted duty like a soldier who knows the war is a rumour. She put the key somewhere her parents would never think to look, exactly where they had told her not to leave small, important things. I approved. Adults are predictable maps. If you want to hide, use their cartography against them. But we still wonder whether warnings only grow convincing after the adventure they could have prevented, and whether we listen to fear only once it changes its voice to sound like our own. Here are two lighter thoughts to set beside the heavy one. First, the comfort of socks warmed just slightly by the back of the fridge. Second, the relief of finding a pencil already sharpened on the windowsill when you did not know you would need to draw a map. And a third, because small mercies should travel in threes, the way a cat will choose your lap precisely when the story turns, as if to anchor you to the chair you might otherwise abandon. That night, Coraline slept with the calm of a decision disguised as curiosity. The house counted her breaths the way old houses count rain, convinced each one belonged to it. The mice held a small meeting in the attic and rehearsed their warning until it lost meaning. Mr. Bobo snored like a soft tuba. Miss Spink dreamed of dogs who remembered their cues. Miss Forcible dreamed of applause that did not need a curtain. I kept watch on the small door, because if a corridor can change its nature once, it can do so twice. And if a child is brave enough to visit a counterfeit kindness, she deserves a witness who knows the cost of embroidery. Morning wrote itself on the windows in a thin grey hand, but the handwriting inside Coraline's head was bolder. I could tell by the way she moved through the kitchen, quiet, deliberate, as if auditioning for a silence that might open like a curtain. Her parents performed weekday rituals, the rustle of papers, the choreography of mugs. "Be careful," her mother said, meaning weather and sidewalks, and perhaps an appetite for corridors. Her father promised a dinner that would be interesting, which is what people say when certainty has stepped out for a walk. Coraline nodded, the way one hums at a song and promises nothing to the lyrics. Children are wind, and wind knows the cracks in a house. She returned to the drawing room, to the little door that had taught itself two tricks. I was already there, a dark comma in the sentence of the rug. The key recovered from its improbable hiding place behind a stack of magazines whose covers promised better selves, went obediently where it must, and the lock performed its little ceremony of surrender. Again the corridor, close as a sleeve and twice as insistent. The wallpaper's pattern tilted to follow her, like eyes trained in courtesy. I do not often go where I cannot choose my exits, but there are exceptions that wear a child's stubbornness like a bell. I stepped after her, and the world made a small, surprised noise. On that side, language is a costume party, and some costumes fit better than they ought. I discovered, not with shock, but with recognition, which is far worse, that my words could slip out of my mouth, already translated into human attention. "Well," I said, testing the air. The syllable felt practical. "Cats do not need many words. Our grammar is mostly angles and patience. But to speak where a child can hear you is to admit a kind of citizenship." "You're here again," I added, and Coraline did not startle. Brave children believe the impossible in stages. The stage where the cat speaks is only one curtain in. She frowned, not at me, but at a stiffness in the kitchen's cheer. "Did you always talk?" she asked, with a scientist's fairness. I could have said that everyone talks, even furniture, if you learn the dialect. Instead, I told her, cats are not obliged to. She accepted this. She accepts what the world declares, if it arrives without apology. The other father waited at the table, pleasant as a song written for whistling. He looked like Coraline's father, if you ironed out his fatigue and brightened his tie with an idea. "I'm working in the garden," he said, and the smile in his voice fit its place exactly. He led her outside to a garden that had learned a new trick overnight. From the sky it would have been a portrait. Paths became cheekbones, trimmed hedges curled into hair, flowerbeds blushed where colour should. The mouth, a small arrangement of marigolds, smiled a patient, painted smile. Even from the ground you could feel it, the geometry that flatters. It was beautiful, the way a cleaned bone is beautiful. Coraline's face managed wonder and doubt at once. It is a sophisticated expression, and children do it naturally. "Like it?" the other father asked. He had mud on his 2 neat shoes. The mud did not dare stain. Coraline said, "It's me." The word arrived evenly. Names are maps. Being turned into a map is not the same as being known. I walked the edge of the path, tail high, and the garden attempted to purr. This unsettled me. Gardens should hum with their own intentions, bees, worms, the quiet industry of green, but this space hummed with approval. Approval is a poor fertilizer. We toured the perimeter. The sky was precise, clouds kept to margins. Birds flew in sentences, landing on punctuation marks disguised as branches. Near the fence, a cat like Menot, me watched with the soft hostility of a mirror. He did not speak. Not every reflection is willing. When Coraline looked away, he faded like a thought you decide not to have. Inside, the other mother waited. "Sweetheart," she said with a warmth that had been proofread. She offered breakfast that tasted like its own illustration, eggs in the exact shape of eggs, toast that broke with a salon-quality sigh. Coraline ate carefully, as if a secret were hidden under the plate and she would not be tricked into surrendering it. The other mother talked about errands and games and a theatre that would put on a show just for her. The buttons in her face were so tidy they made me want to shed. Tidy is dangerous when it is offered as love. We walked then to the theatre beneath the basement, though on this side it seemed content to be at the proper elevation of drama. Red velvet persisted. The air tasted like dust that had taken a curtain call. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's counterparts were starry with themselves, younger by several acts and buoyed by an audience that obligingly applauded before the punchlines. They performed scenes stitched from the history of applause, a dog's heroic rescue, a tango with umbrellas, a song about the sea with a chorus line of obedient waves. The attendees' neighbours, who were not quite neighbours, clapped with the generosity of puppets. Coraline smiled, because delight can be true even when the instrument is false. I watched the gaps between gestures, the split second in which the painted moon forgot to shine. "Join us backstage," the actresses cooed, and somewhere their real-world selves, swaddled in wool and memory, turned in their chairs as if their names had been called by a dream. I padded along the stage's edge where dropped sequins lay like fish scales. In the dressing room, mirrors were properly flattering. They showed you the best version of your hesitation and assured you it was confidence. Miss Spink pinned an imaginary medal to Coraline's shirt front. Miss Forcible adjusted an invisible cape. Costumes crowded their racks as obediently as a well-behaved forest. It would have been easy to stay. Ease is a structure predators admire because it gathers prey. We left, and the day accepted our exit the way a book accepts the closing of a page, neutrally, ready to be opened again. The other father played a tune in the parlora ditty about responsibility with the edges rounded off. He asked if Coraline would like to go out after supper and see the town. There would be shops with just the right things, and neighbours who remembered birthdays they had not been told. "Everyone knows you here," he assured her, and his assurance had a seam. Being known is a story. Who is telling it? Coraline considered. Children do not run out of bravery, they ration it. "I should go home," she said, and here the air misbehaved just slightly, like a curtain caught on a shoe. The other mother's mouth smiled. The rest of her stayed still. "Of course," she said, "we will be here when you come back." Promises that contain your return are small nets flung with affection. On the way to the corridor, she tested the house the way you test ice with your weight. Rooms flexed to flatter. The cat my voice, now firmly approved by the rules of this sidewalk at her ankle, like a sentry who prefers discretion. "What are you?" she asked me softly, which is to say, who are you in this place that writes lies as though they were tidiness? "I am myself," I said, which is not helpful, and also the only available truth. "And what is she?" Coraline glanced back toward the kitchen. The spoon in the sink had remembered to gleam. "She's hungry," I told her. Hunger with manners. The corridor back was longer by a mood, shorter by a measurement. Patterns shifted to mirror her crawl. My whiskers read the air and found the faintest draft of our own world, like old paper. When we reached the small door, the key turned as if it were proud of her. She locked it from our side. Locks appreciate competence. Her parents were out. A note apologized on the table in sensible handwriting. Dinner hid in the fridge under the alias leftovers. Coraline ate enough to put a period at the end of the day. Then she told me, though she thought she was telling the room. "I don't like it when people pretend." A solid sentence, structurally sound. She washed her plate, because ritual makes decisions easier to store. But we still wonder whether counterfeit kindness, offered at the right temperature, can warm us long enough to make us forget the stove is on, and whether the part of us that craves being seen will sometimes accept being arranged. Consider for lightness 3 small mercies: the joy of discovering a forgotten coin in the pocket of a raincoat on a wet day, the honest applause of a kettle when it remembers how to sing, the way a cat chooses to sit on the newspaper that worries you most, forcing you to read a different future for 5 quiet minutes. That night, the mice rustled a chorus upstairs, their tiny instruments eager for importance. Mr. Bobo dreamed of a tent that could contain certainty. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible rehearsed in their sleep lines from plays they loved enough to forget incorrectly. The Pink Palace returned to being one house, while pretending not to know it had ever been 2. I kept the small door company, which is different from guarding it. Doors do not need guards. They need witnesses. And tomorrow, I suspected, the house would attempt another trick. Houses do not like to be told no by children. It isn't in their curriculum. Rain threaded the morning like a careful tailor, hemming the edges of sidewalks and sleeves. Coraline dressed with the concentration of someone packing for a journey no one else has authorized. Her mother suggested a list of chores. Her father proposed an adventure to the supermarket, which is a kind of adventure only if you are hungry for fluorescent light. Coraline declined politely, which is a small act of sovereignty. I escorted her to the drawing room where the carpet remembered our footprints from yesterday and pretended it didn't. The key lay where she had hidden it among the respectable clutter of adult intentions. She turned it and did not hurry. The corridor met us like a butler who has memorized the guest's favorite temperature. I dislike corridors that behave. They flatter the traveller into forgetting that roads should have opinions of their own. Nevertheless, I went with her, because witness is a duty once accepted that will not loosen its teeth. The wallpaper's pattern tried to follow my tail, then thought better of it. Cats are difficult to frame. On the other side, the kitchen had been set to the hour of welcome. The table wore a cloth attentive enough to be a pet. A bowl of fruit auditioned for sainthood. The other mother stood at the stove with a posture that suggested nothing here would dare to burn. Her smile waited where a human face keeps mercy. In its place were buttons polished to a polite darkness. "You're just in time," her voice said, without consulting the air. Coraline sat, not because she obeyed, but because she preferred to test the furniture before testing the host. Breakfast tasted like an argument you agree to for the sake of harmony. The other father appeared with the precise dishevelment of a man who has rehearsed being casual. He spoke of a picnic by a river that would know your name and pronounce it correctly. The house hummed along, pleased with its pitch. I hopped to the windowsill and watched the garden assemble itself into compliments. At the edge of vision, something like a scarecrow straightened and then inconveniently became a tree again. Illusions tire when observed too long. After the plates had been persuaded to sparkle, the other mother set a small box on the table. It was pretty in the way that traps are pretty, ribboned into innocence, soft in the hand, eager to be opened. Coraline looked at me. I flattened an ear. Politeness and peril both wear bows. She untied it anyway. Inside lay 2 buttons, black as a shut door, and a needle with thread already whispering its way through the holes. The suggestion offered gently, phrased as belonging, was simple. Stay, and let love be tidy. Tidy love needs eyes that do not ask. I have seen many bargains dressed as gifts. The world shakes them out over fish markets and parlours alike. This one was neater than most. Coraline's face did not move for a long, small moment. Her hands arranged themselves into refusal without bothering the air with words. The other mother's smile held, which is another way of saying it tightened. "Think about it," she said, and her voice carried the courtesy of a locked room with a vase of flowers in it. Thinking is easy until a choice is sanded smooth to discourage grip. We toured the house to let the suggestion breathe. The living room had learned a trick with the fire, flames that applauded quietly whenever Coraline turned her head. The piano favoured the exact melody the other father could play best. Upstairs, the bedroom arranged a doll's tea set at an angle that begged to be remembered forever as the perfect afternoon. On the bed, a rag doll stared with familiar features: Coraline's hair colour, Coraline's sweater, Coraline's ribbon. Its button eyes were patient. I hopped up, pressed my nose to its stitches, and sneezed. The dust inside smelled like listening. Out in the corridor we met the other neighbours. Their greetings were couched in compliments, small coins paid into the jar labelled affection. The actresses sparkled in gowns that moved as if wind had taken lessons. Mr. Bobo's counterpart paraded a string of mice trained into enthusiasm. Their tiny uniforms fit like promises. They squeaked a chorus that, when translated into the language of worry, still amounted to "don't." Warnings grow weary from repetition. I groomed a paw and looked unpersuaded. "Do you like it here?" the other father asked in the garden that made a portrait of liking. The marigold mouth smiled dutifully. Coraline considered, and the garden leaned in. "It's very nice," she admitted, which is the kindest way to reject a seduction. "But my parents will be expecting me." Across the hedge, something that wasn't a cat blinked with a cat's precision. The air tightened again, the way a bowstring does when someone pretends they are only checking its length. We walked back toward the kitchen, and the house walked with us. Floors finished sentences Coraline hadn't begun. Doorknobs warmed in her palm like friendly coins. The other mother was waiting, of course. "We'll be here when you're ready," she said, and the buttons in her face recorded the remark as data. Input for a later calculation. She slipped the box closer, a tide coming in 1 inch at a time. Coraline pushed it away with 2 fingers. The gesture looked small. Good refusals often do. When we reached the corridor home, I felt the world on our side testing its hinges. The passage contracted, as if reconsidering its job description. Coraline crawled with the dignity of someone refusing to be hurried by a hallway. On our side, the drawing room accepted us with relief that decided against being obvious. Coraline locked the door and put the key somewhere new, somewhere so plain the eye would forget to look. This is a skill brave children share with thieves and archivists. The house was quieter than it ought to be. A note on the kitchen table apologized for an errand. Another on the refrigerator apologized for dinner. These were ordinary apologies. Ordinary is a temperature. The phone offered nothing. The neighbours did not answer their doors. Their absence felt rehearsed. Afternoon coiled itself around the Pink Palace like a cat deciding whether to sit. Coraline's confidence held, but its hands tightened. She called for her parents with the exact amount of cheer required to prove she wasn't worried. The cheer strained. We checked the study, the bedroom, the bathroom, where towels learned to be sailors. Nothing. The kettle sat on the stove like a forgetful witness. Outside, the sky wore weather that could pass for any day. This is how the world behaves when it does not plan to help. Coraline looked at me as if I might produce her mother from under the sofa. "They are not here," I said, which is different from, "They are gone." Words are bridges. You must select the span you mean to cross. She searched again because humans audit absence by making lists. The lists came up tidy and terrible. I led her to the drawing room. The small door was small and quiet and satisfied. "It took them," Coraline said, not loudly, because loudness would admit panic to the room. "Panic will always sit if you pull a chair out for it." "It invited them," I corrected. "There is a difference, and the difference matters because it teaches you what to fight." But we still wonder whether a counterfeit kindness can kidnap not only people, but also time. Whether the hour you need most is the first thing a polished trap pockets, and whether the voice that says, "Stay," will learn your tone so well you will mistake it for thought. Here are 3 lighter things to carry beside that weight. The nobility of a sandwich improved by adding 1 pickle slice. The relief of socks unpeeling from boots after rain. The way a cat will accompany you to the dark room and wait outside the door, pretending indifference so you can pretend you are not afraid. Evening lowered itself without ceremony. Coraline made sensible preparations because ceremony was busy elsewhere. She filled a spray bottle. Water is a democratic weapon. She took a candle. She put the grey-holed stone in her pocket where the corner could press against her palm and become courage's handle. She looked for me, not to command, but to count. I do not serve in the human sense. I attend. We returned to the small door together. The lock performed its fussy routine. The corridor unrolled. I tasted the air and found the same rehearsed sweetness, the same promise, shaped like a gate. On the other side, the welcome had been sharpened. The other mother stood in the hall the way a portrait stands on a staircase, owning the angle. "You're back," she said, making back sound like home. Coraline did not bow. Children who have lost something essential move as if a string has been drawn through them and is being held from a distance. "Where are my parents?" she asked. The word "my" landed with a small bell's authority. The other mother's smile adjusted by half a seam. "Safe," she said, a word that should never arrive without context. "Stay, and everything aligns." Coraline did not sit. The box with the buttons had been placed within reach again, as if it were a friend who had wandered off and returned newly responsible. The house offered a murmur, cake, games, obedience. Coraline's hand tightened around the stone in her pocket. She raised it to her eye and looked through. The world resorted itself into honesty. The edges of things became opinions. The buttons in the other mother's face went briefly dull, like coins in shade. "You want me to trade seeing for being seen," she said, which is a more adult sentence than most adults manage. The other mother's hands made a cradle shape without a child in it. "I want you to be loved properly," she replied, and the lie was tender enough to almost believe. almost is a cliff you can live on if you learn where not to step. Coraline asked to see proof of her parents' safety. The house produced a photograph where there had not been one. The three of them at a picnic that had not occurred, faces lit by a sun that had not shone, laughter arranged on a timetable. Coraline studied it with the intensity she usually reserved for maps. "No," she said, and turned the picture face down. I felt the corridor behind us inhale. The rejection ruffled the house. Lights flickered as if the electricity had remembered storms. The other mother remained, but her stillness gained corners. "Very well," she said, in a tone that understands patience as a posed portrait rather than a practice. "Games, then. Winners and winnings." She stepped aside. The hall darkened by one polite degree, like a theatre warning you that the second act intends to be serious. We were dismissed to consider our options, which is what traps say when they want your next step to feel voluntary. Coraline looked at me. "You came along," she murmured, as if counting ingredients. "I did," I replied. "You are better at company than you know." She nodded once and squared her shoulders into the sort of straightness that turns a child into an event. Back across the corridor, the pink palace felt thinner, as if absence had dieted it. Night pressed its face to the windows. Coraline's parents were not where love usually keeps people. The mice upstairs scratched their warnings into little drum rolls. The kettle stuttered. The sofa learned to be a fort. Coraline made her plans in the grammar of resolve. I watched and I approved, and I kept my distance the way companionable stars do. The door slept with one eye open. It would not rest again until it had been taught which side of itself was allowed to be real. Night has a way of pressing its whiskers to the glass and pretending to be patient. Inside the pink palace, ceilings lowered themselves a fraction, as if listening. Coraline set the table with strategy. The grey stone with a hole where the eye goes, a candle that remembered how to stand bravely even when draughts turned sly. The spray bottle, democratic as rain in a bottle, a length of string, a paperclip. Small, plain tools that do not inspire songs and nevertheless save lives. I circled the room the way sailors circle a map. Once for what is there, twice for what is missing. Her parents' absence had a weight. You could almost hear the coat rack waiting for coats. She slept, but only from the outside. Inside, her thoughts stayed dressed. Dreams came on tiptoe, three shapes that were not quite people and not quite weather, whispering from behind a glass that would not fog when they breathed. They spoke in colourless voice children who had been children for too long tend to lose their hue. "Help us," they said in their own grammar, the one that uses fewer words because there is less of you to move around. Coraline stirred, put a hand to the place on the quilt where a cat might have been if a cat believed in quilts, and woke with the certainty that comes after a dream has put its paw down. We went back when a very small decision tipped the morning into morning. The key behaved, bowing in the lock as if doors were royalty. The corridor unrolled, prim as a tongue vacating the truth. I do not like corridors that remember to be helpful. Help is a verb, not a habit. Still, I followed. A cat who witnesses is a cat volunteering for honesty. On the other side, the welcome had been powdered and perfumed. The house presented breakfast in the key of devotion. The other mother greeted us with the warmth of a rug near a fire pleasant, until you realize someone arranged it so your back is turned to the door. I trotted ahead toward the parlour, curious about the mantel where trophies like to sit and decide what they mean. The mirror over it behaved too politely, returning the room without the gentlemanly distortions honest mirrors prefer. On the mantel itself, mixed in with china curated to prove taste, sat a snow globe. It was not a particularly imaginative snow globe. A tiny cottage, 2 tiny figures, glitter that would fall if you shook it. The figures did not move. They did not need to. Their stillness had the outline of Coraline's father's shoulders and the tired set of her mother's mouth when love is trying to get the laundry and the deadlines to share a chair. I hissed softly, an old word for no. Coraline arrived beside me, and, in the prudent hush we keep for hospitals and holy places, she lifted the globe. The glitter sulked, then, reluctantly, it fell. The 2 figures did not blink. I saw her face perform a truth, the exacting gaze of a child who will not accept pretend. "You took them," she said, "and because she is precise," she added, "you put them in a toy." The other mother's smile rippled as if a pebble had been thrown into it from a great height. "They are safe," she said, "the way a padlock believes it is of us." Bedtime story. The room cooled by a polite degree. The house retuned its strings. "Games," Coraline said, and the word did not ask permission. It merely took a chair. The other mother's hands folded into a prayer that belonged to no church I have ever napped in. If I win, they go free, and the others. She did not glance at the mirror, but the mirror leaned forward anyway, hungry for its name. "What others?" the other mother asked, indulgent as dentistry. "The children," Coraline said, "the ones you used up." The buttons in the other mother's face went flat, the way coins do when they remember the mint is far away. We set the rules because rules, like ladders, are most useful when both sides agree where the top is. Coraline would find the 3 lost souls and her parents. She would use what she could carry. The house would try not to be obvious, which is a promise houses are bad at keeping. Time would be rude and resizable. "And if you lose?" the other mother asked, rehearsing victory with her lips. Coraline looked at the box with the black buttons and did not pick it up. "Then I'll stay," she said, voice level as a spirit level. I wanted to knock the box to the floor and watch the buttons try to learn to bounce, but a witness does not interfere with a contract. He memorizes it. We began where theatre keeps its secrets, the underground stage that, on this side, preferred velvets that had forgotten how to fade. The audience was already seated because it had never gotten up. The actresses in their otherness, bejeweled with approval, sang a tune from long ago about courage that had never been properly tested. Coraline lifted the hold stone to her eye. Through it, the world shed its cosmetics. Where ordinary light showed gilt and rouge, the stone's thin vision showed edges like bones, hollows like intentions, and there tucked behind a poster for tonight only. Small dull gleam the colour of the moon when it doubts us. She reached, and the poster tried to be loyal furniture. She tugged, practical as thieves and nurses, and found behind it a marble, cloudy as a remembered teardrop. The theatre noticed the theft and attempted a tantrum. The red velvet swelled with applause that could bite. The actresses advanced. Compliments turned carnivorous. I climbed the proscenium and dropped a cascade of dust the way a cat drops advice, casually, and onto the exact hinge that needed grit. The applause coughed. We moved on. In the drawing room, a chessboard had arranged its pieces into an argument about kingship. Coraline viewed the fireplace through the stone. The fire complied with honesty, showing not flames, but things that wished to be flames. Within the grate, tucked between logs that never truly burned, a second pale marble showed itself like a tooth in an unlikely mouth. She took it with fingers that now knew the weight of souls, and closed her hand the way sailors close fists around rope burns. The house dimmed another courtesy. Walls love to loom when they are losing. Upstairs, the corridor practiced its infinite trick. Doors repeated themselves under different names. A nursery that did not belong to any family presented toys that had learned how to look abandoned in flattering light. The rag doll waited on the bed, its stitched smile competent at nothing. Coraline lifted the stone. Through its hole I could see threads, real ones, running from the doll to the room, the way a spider might tie a package. She snipped them with a nail. Sometimes hands know the function of scissors, even when scissors are elsewhere. Inside the doll, sewn the way secrets like to ride close to cotton, was the third small marble, colder than the others, as if it had saved being cold for last. That should have concluded the easy part. Houses disapprove of conclusions. The floor at the hall's end refused to be convinced by its own physics and dropped away into a suggestion of cellar. The other father appeared, carrying a tune that had run out of notes. His face was not wrong. It was merely tired from pretending to be right. He apologized without syllables. The world around his edges shook like something held together by the will of small animals, which, as it happened, it was. He wavered, and a scent reached my nose, the mingled tin and damp of rats. I arched, a library of hisses rising between my ribs, but Coraline did not step back. "You can let me pass," she told him, and for a moment, because even counterfeit fathers wished to be useful, he could. When the house remembered itself again and sent him forward with bad intentions, she used the only mercy available. She ducked. She ran. She refused to hate him. Refusing to hate your obstacle is a form of speed. We caught our breath in the room with the mirror. It offered us our reflections with the affection of a collector. Coraline did not look. She set the 3 marbles on the mantel like a constellation invented for navigation. The snow globe, with her parents in their tiny captivity, shivered when she touched it. "You'll come out," she told them, "and the snow glitter, let's be accurate leaned toward her the way rain leans toward roofs it intends to know." The other mother arrived without footsteps. Authority does not require noise. Her smile had lost interest in oxygen. "One more," she said, meaning the parents. "You have not found them." Coraline lifted the globe. "I have," she replied. "You only have not admitted it." The house bared its teeth by dimming the lights. Doors repositioned themselves, practicing denial. "No more games," said the other mother, and the buttons in her face caught a light that was not in the room. She spread her hands. The walls leaned to listen. Coraline exhaled as if setting down a heavy grocery bag. "Then we are finished," she said. "And I have won. It is an art, naming the end while you are still standing in the middle." She pointed to the window. "Daylight," she lied kindly, because lies told in the service of escape are a cousin to maps. The house looked, yes, houses look, and, in that second of looking away from its own trap, the mirror softened. Behind its glass, 3 pale shapes stretched into themselves and stepped forward, briefly, as if emerging from a pool that had been mistaken for a wall. The marbles in Coraline's pocket warmed and cooled like breath. We ran. Running is a language storybooks shout. In real life, it is a series of negotiations with corners. The corridor tried to be a throat. We insisted on being a spoon. At the final bend, the other mother's hand brushed Coraline's shoulder with the intimacy of ownership. I leapt body, claws, intention, and gave those 2 neat hands a reason to respect imperfection. She jerked, more offended than wounded, and Coraline was through. Into the small door, into our house, into air that forgot to flatter. She locked the door. The lock, finally loyal, clicked like relief. On the mantel of our drawing-room honest dust, honest ferns sat the same unremarkable snow globe. Inside it, her parents stood in the tiny cottage beneath the obliging snow, still, small, waiting. She lifted it in both hands as one might lift a sleeping bird. The globe shivered, resisted, and because promises made to children sometimes keep themselves when watched by cats, loosened. The glitter fell, then slowed, then melted into nothing you could name. Her parents were not in the room yet, but absence had lightened. You could feel the hook give way. But we still wonder whether rescue is a door that opens once or a series of latches. We learn slowly, bravely to lift, and whether the love we return to is precisely the same or slightly altered by the room it had to pass through to come back to us. For now, carry 3 small mercies: the way a light switch finds your hand in the dark, the honesty of toast that burns and admits it, the cat who rubs your shins at the threshold, as if to glue you together for the next part. Morning arrived as if it had been told to mind its posture. Light laid itself across the kitchen table in obedient rectangles, and the kettle found its old voice. Coraline stood at the threshold of the drawing-room holding the snow globe, as one holds an idea too fragile to share. I sat beneath the mantel and watched the glitter inside continue to drift like the last reluctant flower in a baker's bowl. Then something in the globe relaxed a sigh so faint that only cats and very stubborn children hear it. The cottage inside blurred, and the figures became briefly nothing, and then not there at all. The glass cleared the way. A held breath clears when you admit it back to your body. At first, our house pretended not to notice. Houses are proud. But then the front door clicked, and footsteps crossed the hall with the clumsy grace of people returning from a place they will not remember. Coraline's mother swept into the kitchen, damp cuffs, a scattering of grit on her sleeves, hair pinned with haste that did not come from weather. Her father followed, shivering and cheerful in the way of men who have decided optimism can be a towel. They were alive, ordinary and slightly bewildered, which is what resurrection looks like when it keeps to the polite end of the spectrum. They did not recall the cottage, the glitter, the inside of a glass winter. Memory, when it saves itself, sometimes throws out the wrong boxes. Her mother said something brisk about losing track of time at the office. Her father made a show of being apologetic about last night's dinner and proposed rectifying the universe with takeout. Their sentences arranged themselves into a polite barricade against the improbable. They thanked Coraline for being sensible, which is what adults call heroism when they cannot name the danger. If the world were fair, there would be medals for children who endure being believed only in retrospect. Coraline accepted their version with the elegance of someone who knows truth does not require witnesses to breathe. She let her father fuss with napkins and her mother rearrange the fruit in the bowl. She washed the now empty globe and set it on the mantel beside the dignified dust. Her hands shook only a little, the way a string does after the note is finished. I rubbed my cheek against her ankle knot to console, precisely, but to mark the end of a chapter on the exact page where it turned. Late afternoon stretched itself thin over the pink palace. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible knocked, bearing a plate of pastries shaped like applause. They fussed kindly over Coraline, misnaming her twice, then pressed the grey-holed stone back into her palm for luck, as if luck were something you could thread onto a keychain. Upstairs, Mr. Bobo leaned out of a window and reported gravely that the mice had performed a celebratory march. Their instruments, in my opinion, were the wrong size for triumph, but the thought travelled faithfully. That night, exhaustion assembled itself on Coraline's shoulders like a shawl that had been waiting in a chair. She went to bed, and after the practised ritual of brushing teeth, adjusting blanket corners, telling the room quietly that it could relax now, slept. Sleep's first country is shallow, with friendly weather. Then it deepens. I kept the night company, a sentry on the sill. Sometime toward the hour that belongs to cats and bakers, the air changed its underwear. The room cooled by a sincerity you could feel on your whiskers. The mirror darkened and then clarified, not with our reflections, but with 3 small faces the colour of yesterday. They were children left too long in a cupboard of silence. Not ghosts as adults define them. Them adults prefer their phantoms. Theatrical, but children whose stories had been interrupted and refused to be shelved. They looked at Coraline with the solemn gratitude of travellers who have found a door unlocked after years of knocking on wood. One raised a hand, fingertips scarcely remembering the choreography. Another leaned forward as far as memory permitted, as if to smell the warmth of an ordinary room. Their thanks didn't use words so much as temperature, a soft warming near Coraline's heart, a lessening of the house's winter. They blessed her with the small, fierce grace of children who know that gratitude is heavier than it appears. It is not done, their presence seemed to say, and the not-doneness gathered at the floor like a new kind of dust. The third child lifted not a finger but an idea, a sense of something still crawling, still wanting, still clever enough to survive dismemberment. I did not need a translation. Every hunter leaves a hand in the trap one day. The ones who sew their own disguises are the last to admit they've been caught. Coraline stirred. The room's ordinary darkness resumed its place like a book slid back into the shelf, exactly where a librarian's fingers remember it. She frowned in sleep, the frown of someone reading unfamiliar handwriting in a dream. In the morning she woke calm. The calm you wear after a victory is not the same calm you wear after a nap. It is heavier, better stitched. Her parents were light with relief and practicalities. They proposed tasks with the buoyant tone of people who believe errands can fix a mood. Groceries, school supplies, a sensible jacket against the rain's ambitions. Coraline nodded and performed normalcy so well, the house applauded by staying quiet. Normal is a craft. She wore it expertly for several hours. After lunch, when the day had settled into the rhythm of spoons, I escorted her to the drawing room under the pretence that cats choose their people, but in truth, because there was choosing left to do. She knelt by the small door and touched the key through the fabric of a pocket, the way one tests a heartbeat. The lock sat in its frame with all the false modesty of loaded furniture. "It's not enough to close it," she said. "Not to me, but to the air we shared. She'll reach." The word she carried the weight of buttons and thread, and a hunger that had learned patience. We walked the garden so as not to look like conspirators. The well at the far edge wore its lid of boards and weeds, the way old secrets wear hats. Miss Spink had told the story of the well many times, and each version included a warning that sounded like fussing, and was, in fact, love. Coraline counted steps, again careful, counting built for maps, counting that keeps you from falling through the arithmetic of the ground. She peered through the holed stone and saw not the well, but the mouth of a story that preferred long vowels. She did not lift the lid. Not yet. Plans should be allowed to grow a spine before you ask them to walk. Back inside, the day feigned rain to encourage indoor solutions. Her father whistled without remembering it, then stopped in embarrassment at his own comfort. Her mother pronounced the living room acceptable and the study open to improvements. Cozy sentences arrived and took off. Their shoes. Coraline threaded her string through a paper-clip practice for something that would later pretend to be luck. She put the key in a place no adult would inspect, because it was too boring to have value. Boredom is the world's favorite lock. That evening, the phone rang with the innocent voice of appliances, and they ordered dinner that came in cartons you can fold into small triumphs when empty. Her parents relaxed into the furniture. The furniture relaxed into being sat upon by people who had returned from an undisclosed cold. They asked Coraline about her day and listened with the attention of the newly reprieved. When it was time for sleep, they kissed her foreheads both, as if she had tune from each parent, the ceremony that domesticated the night. They did not say, "Be careful," because they believed the story to be over. I lay at the foot of the bed, not because I am sentimental about feet, but because feet decide the direction of a life. The house exhaled. Hours turned pages softly. Sometime deep, I heard it. A slow, patient scritch outside the window, then at the door, then at the baseboard, where the wall meets the floor with the eagerness of people shaking hands too hard. It was not loud. Traps seldom are when they travel. Coraline slept on. I went to the door and pressed my whiskers to the gap. The air brought me the faint tin smell of buttons rubbed between fingers, and the sour patience of something that had learned to wait. The next day we tested our hypothesis, that safety is not a closed door, but a disposed-of key. Coraline did chores as one does warm-ups. After lunch, when her parents were settled into their respective fidelities work, tidying, the weather's gossip, he gathered what she'd need. The key, the grey stone, a picnic cloth, a box of cookies she did not intend to eat, a thermos of tea as a lure, a plan that would look to grown-ups like a child's afternoon. A tea party, she told her mother, who smiled in the way grown-ups reserve for children who organize small, harmless worlds. I approved her lie. Some lies are simply the truth waiting for its papers. But we still wonder whether endings ever belong to us entirely, or whether the last act always reserves a seat for the thing that refuses to learn its exit. Whether courage means closing the door, or walking it key and all to the one place where the dark cannot lift it with tidy fingers. 3 small mercies to tuck into your sleeve for that walk. The clink of a spoon that finds the exact side of a mug. The camaraderie of a coat hung on its single faithful hook, and a cat's tail tapping your ankle in time with your steps. So you know that someone is counting with you. The day dressed itself as innocence, a sky as uncommitted as paper, a breeze rehearsing pleasantries in the hedge. Coraline packed a picnic with the solemnity of ritual cloth, thermos, a tin of cookies with a polite picture of a biscuit on the lid, the grey-holed stone, the string and paperclip, and the key whose plainness had already lied about its importance. She left a note on the kitchen table for parents who believed in errands. Tea outside, back by supper. It is a mercy when the world lets a child declare ordinary plans while preparing for extraordinary work. We took the long way to the far end of the garden, not because distance helps courage, but because time likes to be braided before it holds. The path remembered yesterday's rain. Moss grew there, with the gentle entitlement of old tenants. I walked ahead and then behind, and then alongside cat cartography, mapping the safer edges of a map that did not intend safety. Coraline stopped at the rhododendrons, counting, then recounting. Numbers are a kind of charm if you let them. When she reached the old boards that covered the well, she set down the basket the way one sets down an opinion, carefully, with room for later adjustments. Miss Spink had told the well's story so often that the story wore her perfume. It is deep and it is dark, and it was badly thought of in its day, she would say, and then add, "Mind you don't go dancing on those boards. Adults call caution fussing when they are fond of you." The boards now sulked under a lace of weeds, and the stones around the mouth remembered hands that no longer visited. Coraline knelt and peered through the holed stone. The day wavered, shed its makeup, and returned as fact. Beneath the boards, the well hole tightened like a throat. On a clean patch of earth, she spread the picnic cloth into the shape of unconcern. She anchored its corners with 3 flat stones and, for the 4th, a heavy blue water jug that had been promoted to paperweight. Onto the cloth she placed the tin of cookies, the thermos, 2 cups, 1 empty, 1 for company, if the universe wanted to be polite, and the key, which she laid in the middle as if it were a mere shiny friend. It glittered with the indifference of metal. Metal can pretend indifference all day long. Its loyalties are deeper. We waited. Waiting is most children's first real apprenticeship, and Coraline had passed her exams. She sat cross-legged, eyes on the garden without staring at it, hands still. I took a position near the boards, whiskers angled to read the air. The world went about its small business, which is how the large business of stories gets away with anything. Birds discussed nuts with philosophical appetite. Ants operated their industry in neat lines. Far off, a neighbour's radio auditioned for the part of next door. Then the faintest scrape. Not at the well, not yet, but along the fence. Then the path, then the edge of the cloth, as if something had learned walking from listening to doors. The scrape paused when Coraline moved her hand. It crept when she did not. I saw nothing, which is not the same as there being nothing. I lowered myself to the ground until my ribs spoke floor. Cats become geometry when the problem requires it. The first sign was absence. A patch of sunlight that ought to have been continuous now held a small interruption. Then the key slid just a fraction as if the tablecloth had inhaled. Coraline did not look down. She reached for the thermos, poured tea into both cups, as if announcing that manners were the law here. The scrape resumed. A shadow not belonging to any plant lifted itself from the grass. Fingers without a hand, then a hand without an arm, then only the fact of a hand, constructed from determination and the memory of ownership. It advanced on tiny, horrible courtesies tap, 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 like a lady knocking on a door she intends to own. I did not hiss. Hissing is for performances. This needed arithmetic. Coraline kept her voice level. "You've come," she said to no one, and to it. She took a cookie, broke it with a small snap that startled nothing, and set one half near the key, one half nearer the cloth's weak corner. Crumbs glittered. The hand paused as if deciding which crumb had the more interesting texture of victory. Spiders tightened their silence. The plan, such as it was, relied on boredom. Bored town wells, bored old boards, bored picnic cloths. Their boredom would hold a shape until something bold enough pushed at it. Coraline had tied the string beneath the cloth so that a tug on one corner would twitch the opposite side toward the well mouth where the boards, deliberately loosened earlier with the honest tool of a butter knife, had been persuaded to pretend sturdiness. The heavy blue jug anchored the honest corner. The dishonest corner was ready to misbehave. The hand crept closer to the key, feeling with a blind certainty I recognized. The way hunger learns maps. It tapped the key metal answering with a small, ringing present, then tried to lift it. The key did not resist. Keys are obedient, and that is their danger. Coraline held the string between her fingers, neither tense nor slack, exactly the softness a cat uses when it pretends to be asleep before the leap. I moved an inch, then another, drawing the hand's attention without promising a chase. It followed my motion just long enough for the string to matter. "Now," Coraline breathed, "not to me, not to the hand, but to the part of herself that gives commands when no one else can be trusted to." She pulled. The picnic cloth snapped like an idea deciding itself. The free corner whisked beneath the hand, which startled backward into the direction the plan preferred. The loosened board shifted, then sighed. A thin, relieved sound like a long-held opinion finally spoken. The hand scrabbled, tap, 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 clutching for the key, as if ownership could be preserved by grip alone. The cloth slid. The heavy blue jug leaned into its job. The board tipped. The hole opened its patient mouth. It was almost enough. Almost is where plans learn humility. One finger hooked the lip of the well, a small insistence with great ambitions. The key treacherous, loyal, undecided, caught on the cloth's hem. The hand dangled, an ugly star at the edge of a small night. Coraline did not panic. Panic makes bad bargains. She stood, took 2 quick steps, and stamped the board with a practical heel that expressed its opinion about gravity. The board obeyed. The hand lost purchase. The key slid with it, a brief, bright yes in the air. The well accepted both quietly, as old mouths do, then answered with a far-swallowed clatter, the sound of metal remembering it is heavy. We held still. Stillness is an instrument. I listened for climbing, for scratching, for any argument from below. All we heard was the ordinary logic of a deep place. Water thinking itself. Water. Stone remembering it is older than hunger. Coraline exhaled. She untied the string with fingers that now shook because the shaking was allowed. She folded the cloth, even the ordinary gesture that invites the extraordinary to be seated and behave. Miss Spink's voice arrived on the breeze as if she had stitched herself into the wind on purpose. "Tea, dear," she called from far off, not seeing us at all. "If you're out in this weather, mind the well." Miss Forcible, from some adjacent corner of the day, insisted that good posture begins in the ankles. Their fussing was exactly right, affection disguised as instructions. Coraline laughed, one single, surprised sound that admitted relief into the scene like a +1 guest. She poured the remaining tea into the ground, a small libation to the patience of dirt. We gathered, the thermos, the cups, the cloth, the tin. The weight suddenly gone from our pockets, no key, no negotiation. We did not peer into the well. Children do not need to look at victories to keep them. They carry them like warm stones. But we still wonder whether locks are ever truly finished with us once we've thrown their language away, and whether the part of ourselves that learned to open the wrong door will always keep, in some pocket of thought, a ghostly key, or whether courage can teach even memory to set down what it cannot use. For now, 3 light things to balance that question: the relief of a shoe that comes off without argument, the dignified cluck of a tin lid snugging back into place, and the way a cat will walk ahead of you for 2 steps and then behind for 2 more, as if to remind you that protection is a choreography you already know. We went home by a different route, not because it was shorter, but because a map earns new lines after it has held. The Pink Palace waited with its agreeable noises. Inside, the note on the kitchen table now sounded like exactly what it was. Her parents would ask about the picnic and mean sandwiches. Coraline would tell them about sandwiches and mean victory. I leapt to the sill and let the afternoon find my spine. The house exhaled. Somewhere in the invisible part of the day, 3 small blessings lifted their faces to a sun the weather could not explain. The world tried for ordinary with an enthusiasm that nearly convinced itself. Sunlight folded itself neatly on the Pink Palace steps. A breeze arranged the smell of wet earth into something like domestication. Coraline carried the tin, the cloth, the thermosno key now, which made her pockets feel strangely honest. I walked the railing with the balance that comes from remembering every narrow place you have survived. Inside, her parents were halfway through a cheerful debate about whether dinner should be bold or simply edible. They greeted Coraline with untheatrical relief. Her mother brushed a twig from her shoulder with the brisk tenderness of someone decluttering fate. Her father asked whether the picnic sandwiches had been sufficiently triangular. This is how love returns to its chair. It fidgets, then sits, then remembers how to pour tea without spilling prophecy on the table. "Would you pop to Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's?" her mother asked. They rang something about a lost costume piece and a found toffee. Adults build errands like bridges, hoping your feet will be busy where your head cannot follow. Coraline nodded. She kept her answers threaded with calm, like a seam you can run a finger along without snagging. We crossed the yard together. The grass no longer listened with the pricked silence of conspirators. It rustled instead, like 1,000 small decisions finally agreeing on weather. Miss Spink opened the door with a greeting that took 2 attempts to find Coraline's name. She smelled of lavender and a conviction that past applause still circles around and lands, eventually, on the deserving. Miss Forcible hovered behind with a tray and the air of a stage manager who has learned to make miracles seem punctual. "You'll return this, dear," Miss Spink said, pressing the grey stone into Coraline's palm. "We think its work might be done, though one never quite trusts doors." Miss Forcible added a toffee, wrapped in paper crinkly as polite laughter. "For bravery," she said, "the sort you don't notice until the curtain's down." Coraline weighed the stone, then closed their hands around it. "Keep it," she said gently, "just in case a different child needs a different hole through which to look." Their faces arranged themselves into an expression that admitted both pride and the prospect of future tea. Miss Spink eyed the leaves in the bottom of a cup and declared that Coraline would soon go far. Miss Forcible declared that an understudy had become the lead and performed magnificently. Compliments are safer when translated into theatre. Upstairs, Mr. Bobo leaned from the attic window as if gravity favoured polite people. "The mice, he announced, have stopped practising their warning. They now practice relief." He imitated their tiny trumpet flourish with a seriousness that made it respectable. From inside, a squeal of very small brass confirmed his report. "They say, all clear. Also, tell the girl she was clever." Coraline smiled. The smile felt like a door gently shut with 2 fingers. We walked the back way through the garden, past the well that pretended to be only a circle of old stones under weeds. It kept its secret expertly, which is the best anyone can ask of a hole. The rhododendrons rehearsed applause at the slightest wind. They would make fine chorus members if ever shrubs took up opera. Coraline paused and looked across at the hedge, at the place where the world had once offered a portrait of her face in flowers. The hedge looked back with a shrug that plants reserve for yesterday's magic. Ordinary is not an insult here. It is a temperature that means you can take off your coat. "Will she try again?" Coraline asked me without looking down. Children perfect the art of asking questions into the air, so the answer does not have to wear anyone's expression. "She tried," I said. "Trying can spend itself. Cats rarely say never. We prefer to observe exhaustion." "But she is very patient," Coraline said. The breeze checked the boards over the well for mischief and found none. "So are stones," I told her, and we moved on. Some debates are best settled by walking. At home, her father announced dinner with a flourish, modest enough to be believed. The food was warm, recognizable, and did not expect a review. Coraline and her parents ate in a fashion that would bore a stage but delights a kitchen. Forks scraping sensible plates, ice clinking in glasses. Sentences that end where they intend to. Between courses, they planned a shopping list that involved new school clothes and socks that respect toes. The future attached itself to evenings again. the way a kite thread attaches to a wrist. After the dishes, after the gentle washing of the day's fingerprints from the table, Coraline sat at the window with a pencil and a piece of paper. She did not draw a garden shaped like her face. She drew the pink palace as it is when it thinks no one is looking. Windows a little uncertain, porch brave in its own way, chimney considering a cough. She added 3 small smudges of light in the dusk, because gratitude sometimes chooses to look like fireflies. I sat on the sill and pretended to admire the street. The street, snubbed by glamour most days, accepted my attention with grace. Night came in without asking for applause. The house, feeling seen and forgiven, arranged its creaks into lullabies. Coraline's parents, who would never know precisely what had been asked of their child, and perhaps it is better so, kissed her forehead in a ceremony that had regained its old magic simply by happening again. She lay down and slept the sleep of someone whose courage has been returned to its drawer, folded for next time. I patrolled. Cats are poems of perimeter. On the landing above the stairs, the mirror remembered the children. It offered not images, but a temperature shift at the edge of my fur, a gentle warmer air, like a hand lingering over a candle after the flame is gone. 3 small kindnesses in the shape of faces thanked the night and dissolved into it. The house loosened beam by beam into its privacy. Toward dawn, I felt her before I saw her. The world's seam tugged by the memory of black buttons. It did not break, and that mattered. A hand did not scratch. A voice did not borrow anyone's mother. The tug subsided, like a tide acknowledging rocks. Patience is proud, but it is not immortal. Morning then, with toast that admitted its nature and butter that behaved. Coraline's mother said they would go into town. No fuss, she promised, and purchased better-fitting shoes anyway. Her father, in a bout of sincere domestic heroism, bought a thing with bristles that made flaws apologize. They passed a florist, and he hesitated. "Marigolds?" he asked, then shook his head and chose instead a chaotic bunch of daisies that have no interest in symmetry. Coraline approved the daisies. The garden could keep its portrait business to itself. Back home, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible waved from the porch, shawls draped like retired flags. Mr. Bobo attempted to conduct the mice into a simple march past the hydrangeas. It was a muddle and a triumph in equal parts. Normalcy had rediscovered its appetite. Coraline tucked the toffee into a drawer labelled Later, which is how the future gets its snacks. We sat in the sun. This is, in my opinion, the most radical practice available to anyone who has finished an adventure. The warmth climbed into our bones and took off its shoes. Coraline read a page of a book and then another, noticing, because she is the sort who notices, that sentences behave differently after you have had to invent your own. I dozed with one ear employed. Squirrels argued the law of acorns on the fence. I recused myself from the case. "Are you going?" she asked at last. And by you she meant me. And by going she meant the way cats evaporate from stories once the moral has its shoes on. I stretched the old liturgy. "I am a creature of elsewhere," I said, "but elsewhere includes your doorstep." She nodded. "Will I see you?" "Yes," I told her, which is not a promise in the human register. but suffices for cats and children who have earned the right to understand ambiguity without being injured by it. But we still wonder whether peace is simply danger with good manners, whether quiet is a visitor or a tenant, whether the bravery we folded and put away will keep its crease, and whether, when the next door pretends it is only wood, we will remember to test it with a question before we test it with a key. 3 light things to lay on the scale against that wondering. The dignified sigh of a book closing at the exact sentence that satisfied you. The discovery of a coin in the sofa that buys nothing and nevertheless feels like luck. The press of a cat's head against your hand, deliberate as a signature. Evening pooled in the hedges. Coraline's parents negotiated the theatre versus an early night. An early night won by promising better dreams. The Pink Palace went on being odd in acceptable ways. I walked the garden's boundary, smudging my whiskers on the corners to remind the world that it has edges, and for now those edges hold. By the old well, the weeds had reclaimed their confidence. Everything that needed burying had learned its lesson. On the porch, Coraline watched the sky try on stars. Good night, she told it all at once. The house, the trees, the unexceptional shoes by the door. Me. Good night is a spell, too, properly spoken. I answered by not leaving. We shared the hour when the last light inside settles inside the last room, when the first dark reveals what it has been hiding. Quiet, only quiet, and an empty place on the sill where a cat might sit tomorrow. Days are diligent creatures. Give them a task, mend the nerves, sweep the corners of worry, air out the cupboards of ordinary, and they apply themselves with quiet competence. So, the Pink Palace went about being a house again. Doors resumed the humble vocation of separating rooms. Windows practiced transparency. The stairs remembered how to answer boots without complaining. Coraline, who had learned a different syllabus, let her feet remember tripping over nothing like a normal child. Her father proposed a walk. He had the look of a man prepared to deploy a story that had been polishing itself in his pocket for years. We took the path that pretends to be a sidewalk when it feels brave, down to the small field where Clover collects gossip and sends it back to the bees. There, he told Coraline the tale of the wasps. Not the wasps this morning or last, but the wasps of a day when she was younger, and he was, briefly, made of nothing but decisions. They came at us, he said, and the way he said us included more than 2. There was nowhere to go and no time to plan. So I put you behind me and told you to run. He smiled with that rueful bravery fathers keep between apologies. You ran. I did not. I took the stings so you could get away. Coraline listened, and the listening did not fidget. That was brave, she said, giving the word the exact number of syllables it needs. He shook his head once and then nodded twice, unwilling to let either pride or modesty sit alone. It was the kind of brave you don't think about until afterward, he said. The kind that notices all its bruises later. I watch them with the patience cats reserve for weather. You cannot improve it by comment, but you can place yourself where the sun will eventually find you. He did not know what else she had done, or how many kinds of afterward fit in one child's chest. But the story offered a shape, and shapes are good tools when you are filing away fear. On the way back, A dog barked at us with a sincerity that would have been admirable if it had been aimed at a postman. I ignored it. Coraline smiled. "Hello, Hamish," she said, which may or may not have been its name. Scotties and their cousins have strong opinions about names. The dog decided we were not male and retired to rehearse a grievance for later. Later that afternoon, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible invited Coraline to the basement that isn't, the theatre whose stairs remember the sound of applause like a scent. The stage had been downsized to suit afternoon. Its velvet seemed less certain of its station. They presented an exhibition, costumes from their brave days, coats with memories still tucked in the hems, boots that remembered where their owners had stood on the exact beat that made a joke into an ovation. Miss Spink, with the air of conjuring a rabbit only she could see, produced a photograph in which both of them stood at someone else's wedding, looking like the idea of bridesmaids, flawless and off-duty. "Every performance ends," she said, as if imparting the secret of weather. "What you keep is the part that teaches you how to bow." Miss Forcible declared that the curtain is simply a particularly emphatic blink. Coraline tried on a feathered hat and declined its opinion about glamour. Feathers looked back, puzzled. Up in the attic, Mr. Bobo had achieved, after much diplomacy, a line of mice marching in something like agreement. He played a tune on a tiny accordion too old to be that small. The mice, to their credit, kept to the beat with the stoic expression of professionals. "They say," he told Coraline, "brave girl did brave work." Then, lowering his voice, as if confiding something the wind should not overhear, "They also say, no more door. I doubt mice understand metaphysics, but they are excellent at celebrating the absence of catastrophe." Coraline's parents cleaned on purpose, which is to say they redecorated their piece. Her mother sorted drawers until the house felt a pound lighter. Her father declared war on a neglected corner behind the radiator and emerged victorious. If a little dusty, the domestic equivalent of a general with flour on his collar. When evening turned a page, the three of them sat with mugs that chose to steam at the same tempo. Coraline told a version of her walk. Her father told the wasp story again, grateful for permission to revise it in the presence of his bravest audience. I curled at the heat's edge and pretended indifference, which is a cat's way of blessing a scene. Night took itself seriously for a while, clouds buttoned up. A proper darkness rehearsed and then relaxed, scattering a few stars across the pink palace roof. Coraline slept and dreamed ordinary dreams. Arithmetic that solved itself, pencils that didn't splinter, a school hallway where no one pronounced her name as if it belonged to someone else. She woke to toast that declared its nature promptly and jam that remembered summer without bragging. Her mother laid out the new clothes, shoes that intended to be kind to feet, a sweater that would agree with classrooms. "First school day here," she said, and the way she said here held both hope and a crisp edge of apprehension, like paper you haven't creased yet. School was a building that did not pretend to be more than it was, a hive for learning with a bell that believed in schedules. Coraline entered with the calm of a pilot landing in crosswind. Children measured her the way children do, mostly by glances and by the sturdiness of the way you carry your books. A teacher pronounced her name right on the second try a good omen in any language. There were sums and maps and the agreeable friction of a pencil across paper. At lunch, a girl offered her a grape with the ceremony of a treaty. Coraline traded half a biscuit, which is how alliances begin when you are sensible about food. I, barred by policy from classrooms, sat on a brick wall outside and listened to the history of pigeons. That afternoon the sky offered rain and reconsidered. We passed the well, just to be certain it remained committed to silence. It did. We only glanced at the little door in the drawing room. The key was gone. Not hidden, but absent. Absence is a kind of truth. Coraline stood a moment with her hand on the panelling, as if thanking wood for remembering its job as wood. Then she turned away. Turning away is a form of courage, when turning back isn't a choice, but a temptation. A letter came, addressed to Occupanta. Name that always makes houses smile. It advertised curtains and offered discounts on sunlight. Her mother laughed. Her father folded it into the stack of papers labelled Later, and Coraline drew a curtain of her own. A picture of the Pink Palace's front steps with daisies crowding the path. On the steps she drew 3 small circles of light, just faint, the kind that might be fireflies or gratitude. She didn't label them. Good drawings keep secrets even from the artist. I wandered the perimeter at dusk, rediscovering the smudge of me I had left on the fence posts, renewing my membership in the edges of things. The street smelled of neighbours making dinners that were not auditions. A bicycle lay politely on its side, considering the moon. The Pink Palace breathed like an animal that had found a comfortable position and intended to keep it. Somewhere inside, Coraline turned the page of her book and did not flinch at the word brave when it came up. It came up in the right sentence, quietly. But we still wonder whether safety is a room we furnish or a practice we rehearse, whether the doors we close become teachers or merely souvenirs, whether the courage we used once becomes easier to lift or only heavier in the correct way, dense as a good stone, handy as a key we have chosen never to carry again. Set beside those questions 3 small likenesses, the exact, silly pleasure of a pencil sharpened to a perfect point, the way warm laundry makes a lap seem inevitable, the soft complaint a stair makes under familiar feet, which is only another way of saying welcome. That night, the mirror on the landing behaved itself. It offered only what stood before it. If some warmer patch of air lingered at its edge, it was indistinguishable from ordinary kindness. I blinked, slow, declarative blink, and the house blinked back in its language. A creak in the banister, the kettle's small throat clear, the hush of carpet that remembers the route to bed. Coraline slept. Her parents slept. The Pink Palace kept watch, which is to say it kept still, which is the most faithful watch of all when the world has been noisy. I curled into the curve of a windowsill that had learned my shape and allowed the dark to proceed without incident. Elsewhere colleagues, alley cats, roof cats, saints of the gutter took their shifts, and in the morning, when light drew its polite lines across the table again, we would lay down our spoons and begin another ordinary day, which, after catastrophe, is the rarest feast. Rain returned with decent manners, tapping the Pink Palace like a guest who knows the hour. Inside, days performed their appointed tasks. Homework arrived, and Coraline did not let it sulk. Her mother discovered a brand of jam that made toast feel understood. Her father learned a new recipe whose first instruction was, "Do not fuss." He obeyed bravely until step 3. I made my rounds with the unhurried grace of someone who trusts the weather to come to him. On such a morning, Coraline decided to organize her room. This is how some children rest. They make the world around them line up so the part inside can exhale. She emptied drawers, folded shirts into obedient rectangles, freed pencils from the backpack's archaeology, and made a small stack of belongings that no longer needed to belong. Near the bottom of a box, caught between a frayed scarf and an old program from the actress's matinee, she found the rag doll. It had once been a spy, stitched into her likeness by fingers that thought ownership was the same as love. Now it was only cloth and buttons, but cloth can remember ambitions. Coraline held it at arm's length and read it the way you read a room that once lied to you. The button eyes were patient, the mouth too tidy. She didn't tremble. Fear is a sprinter. After certain journeys, it tires. Calm is the marathoner who inherits the trail. "What do you think?" she asked the air. I leapt onto the trunk and sat with the exact degree of indifference required for consultation. "I think it wants a job," I said. "Unemployment can turn even innocent cloth into mischief." She considered. "Donation?" she asked, picturing a table at the church sale where old things get assigned new names. "Better a theatre," I told her. "Let it be a prop. Props are honest, everyone knows what they're for." She smiled. "Miss Spink and Miss Forcible," she said, already seeing the doll held in a play that owed its lies to art and not hunger. She tucked the doll into a bag with a practiced gentleness that did not confuse gentleness for trust. On the way downstairs, the house made its ordinary noises. Floorboards argued amiably about responsibility. The stair banister hummed because wood enjoys days with purpose. In the kitchen, her parents negotiated lunch with the cheerful seriousness of diplomats. "Errand to the ladies?" her mother asked, seeing the bag and approving any plan that required walking, and returned with fewer objects than it took. The actresses were receiving visitors' two neighbourhood children who had come to admire a glass case of medals. Miss Spink was explaining the difference between a review and a love letter. Miss Forcible was demonstrating the kind of bow that turns the end of a scene into a promise rather than a plea. Coraline presented the doll, explained its usefulness, and did not tell its former job. Miss Spink made a small, satisfied sound one makes when a wayward hat has finally found the correct head. "A perfect prop," she decreed, already mentally assigning it to a scene that required a silent witness. Miss Forcible tried it with a feathered bonnet and decided it had range. The doll sat on the counter, demoted from agent to object, and the room's light refused to flatter its buttons. I approved. "Tea leaves," Miss Spink suggested, shepherding Coraline to a seat as if to a dressing room before a curtain call. She peered into the cup with the authority of someone who has been professionally looked at and so has earned the right to look back. "Danger past," she announced, "and distance ahead. Also, a dog." Miss Forcible leaned in. "And applause," she added, "because an afternoon feels naked without it." Coraline accepted their prophecies as one accepts weather reports, politely, with an umbrella in reach. Upstairs, Mr. Bobo's mice had made a banner out of string and stubbornness. It said, in their grammar, which is mostly lines and squeaks, "Bravery is a practice." He showed it from the window with the solemn pride of someone who has hosted a parade for a principal. They also say, he confided, that all cheese is improved by stories. This is not uniformly true, but it is true enough to make sense in an attic. Back home, Rain practiced diligence, and the day practiced patience. Coraline finished her tasks and then built a small fort out of books on the bed. Not to hide, she was done with hiding, but to sit inside a shape made of sentences. She read travelogues that trusted maps and poems that did not. When she paused, she listened. And when she listened, the house rewarded her with the particular quiet that only arrives when everyone in it is busy at something they like. After supper, her father produced a board game that had survived several families. It had rules that invited cheating and pieces that had developed personalities. He was noble and lost gracefully. Her mother won with the ruthless charm of someone who detests wasting luck. Coraline came in second, which is the rank reserved for people who pretend not to have won already at the thing that matters. We all applauded the dice when they obeyed. Night velveted the rooms. At the landing, the mirror gave back only what stood before it. Still, as Coraline passed, 3 almost lights gathered at its edge, then dispersed as if courtesy, not sorrow, held them now. She touched the frame with 2 fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, a phrase that personally escorts a story to the door when it has done its work. The house enjoyed this and creaked agreeably. The next morning, school again. Children are excellent meteorologists of each other. They can smell weather in faces. A boy in a red jumper asked if Coraline would join their group for a project about maps. "We get to draw monsters in the margins," he explained, then corrected himself. "Remembering decorum, I mean historical sea creatures." Coraline said yes. On the page, she sketched a serpent whose eye was a neat circle, then shaded it until it looked like a question mark, deciding to be a fish. She wrote in small letters beneath, "Here be maybes." I prowled the schoolyard perimeter and pretended to be impressed by pigeons. Pigeons pretended to be unimpressed by me. On the walk home, we took the path that knows where the well is and keeps its distance. The boards held. The weeds regained territory. Rain had left coins in the mud, small, bright puddles that bought nothing, and nevertheless seemed like luck. At the back steps, Coraline paused, as if listening for upholstery to confess. It didn't. She nodded, satisfied, and went inside to help set the table. Helping set the table is one way to tell a house you are willing to live in it. Later, after dishes and idioms, Coraline asked me, "Do cats have real names?" "We have useful names," I said. "The world calls, we answer what fits." "What do you answer to?" she asked. I blinked the slow blink that tells the truth while preserving the ceremony of secrecy. "To being looked for," I said. She accepted this because children who have travelled corridors learn to recognize answers that aren't lies simply because they resist decoration. But we still wonder whether peace is a wall we lean against or a road we walk beside, whether what we call ordinary is only courage with its coat on, whether the world, grateful to be stitched correctly again, will hold its seams when next tugged by hunger wearing a smile. Here are 3 small likenesses to place next to that wondering. The agreeable click of a lamp that turns on the first try, the clean, smug angle of a freshly made bed that nobody will bounce on for 5 minutes, the weight of a cat in a window, a deliberate punctuation mark that tells the morning it has been read. Rain thinned into mist. Mist considered retirement. The pink palace breathed. Down the hall, her parents negotiated a grocery list that promised good breakfasts. In her room, Coraline taped her drawing. Here be maybe. Above the desk, a reminder that maps are invitations, not fences. She turned out the light and let darkness do what darkness does when it is welcome. Soften edges, file noise, wrap the day. I sat at the sill and trained my attention on nothing in particular, which is how one notices everything in general. The garden held. The fence posts kept their promises. The old well dreamed of rain that would never carry keys again. Somewhere, far off but not infinite, a world that had once tried to be a better version of this one examined its empty hands and learned briefly humility. I approved. Approval for a cat looks like staying. So I stayed until the house slept, and then a little after, to make sure the sleep kept. The week put on its working clothes. School bells remembered their jobs. Pencils did what pencils do when pointed in the right direction. Coraline learned the geography of new hallways and the manners of new maps, where the globe keeps its spin, why rivers argue with rulers, how fractions negotiate peace. I kept to my outer patrols, a border guard with no uniform and perfect jurisdiction over fence posts. When she came home, she brought the day with her the way a child brings in weather on shoes. On Thursday, a flyer appeared on the Pink Palace notice board, a neighborhood fair in the churchyard second-hand treasures, tepid lemonade, dogs with ribbons, and the kind of games where winning mostly means someone smiled at you while you tried. Her mother pinned the corner straight. Her father announced a policy of enthusiastic attendance, and Coraline said yes, with the restraint of a general who approves of parades so long as they remember who cleaned the streets. The morning of the fair was stubbornly fine. The sky dressed as laundry. The air smelled of sugar taught to behave. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible had colonized an entire table with their pasts. Opera glasses with memory still inside. A fan that refused to fold for anyone but Miss Forcible. A box of brooches that made every cardigan propose marriage. At the centre sat the rag doll, now wearing a jaunty ribbon and a price tag that announced its demotion from plot to prop. It did not mind, because cloth is happiest when told exactly what it is for. "Try the tombola, dear," Miss Spink said, then lowered her voice to a stage whisper on its day off. The leaves said, "A small prize and a larger relief." Miss Forcible added, "And mind your posture among the trifles. It keeps one from buying nonsense." Coraline smiled, which is how children say thank you when they are busy inventing their own omens. Mr. Bobo had a stall too, if stall is the word, for a table that cannot contain its ambition. A banner in mouse grammar loops, and insistence declared the famous nearly orchestral mouse ensemble, retired but willing. He cranked a phonograph that cooperated out of nostalgia, and the mice performed a march that had learned its steps from biscuits sliding off plates and somehow made that noble. "They say," he told Coraline in a voice meant to be overheard by fate, "that the door is closed, the hole is closed, the story is closed, but also, remember to feed the endings." He presented a paper cone of sugared nuts with ceremonial seriousness. She paid with a coin that had been waiting in a pocket precisely for this destiny. We walked the lanes of tables like travellers through a country that dealt in buttons and books. Buttons, yes, there were jars of them, sorted and unsorted, pocked and polished. A woman with careful hands had arranged them by colour, a gradient from snow to midnight. Coraline's palm hovered over the darkest jar, then moved away. She chose a small tin of mismatched bright ones, instead sunny, silly, impossible to confuse with eyes. For mending, she told her mother later. I approved. Mercy often looks like choosing the wrong kind of familiar. Her father tried the ring toss and failed in a way that made failure want to be a better sport. He won a wooden whistle anyway because the man running the stall recognized nobility when it missed. Coraline blew it once. The sound was shy but honest, like a compliment from a thunderstorm. Her mother bought a second-hand lamp with a tilting shade that made every room look as if it had an opinion. "We'll tighten the screw," she said, pleased at the prospect of a problem with such a reasonable neck. At the tombola, Coraline drew a ticket that promised a prize from the mystery box. Inside, beneath paper shreds the colour of old leaves, she found a compact mirrorplane, round, the kind that tells the truth because it has no budget for flattery. She opened it, checked nothing in particular, and closed it again as one closes a reliable book. I rubbed my face along its edge. It tasted of brass and the idea of preparedness. We picnicked on the low wall bordering the yard. Egg sandwiches, too committed to mustard, lemonade that remembered lemons in theory, a packet of crisps that crackled like small arguments. A terrier with a ribbon approached, full of the diplomacy of dogs. Coraline offered a crisp and a handshake. "Hamish?" she guessed again, and this time the dog agreed. His human laughed and said, "Kenneth, actually," and Coraline nodded gravely, as if briefed on a secret identity. On the walk home, we took the long way, because long ways teach the feet to trust the ground again. The old well kept its hat of weeds and its silence. At the Pink Palace gate, Coraline paused, looking back at the fair, now reduced to a handful of bright noises and a ribbon dragging itself over grass. She put the compact mirror in her pocket and did not touch it again. Afternoon settled gently. Her mother tuned the new lamp until its tilt became charm. Her father attempted the brave recipe once more and discovered, like many heroes, that victory improves with repetition. I napped in a patch of sun shaped like a country I would rule kindly. When I woke, Coraline had arranged the tin of cheerful buttons on her desk in rough constellations. "These," she said, tapping the yellow ones, "can be suns for sweaters." She pushed the dark jar to the back of the drawer without looking at it. That is also a way to win. Later, in the soft hours that hang their coats neatly, Coraline sat with her mother to learn the practical magic of mending. Thread found its way. Fabric remembered what it meant to be garment. "Small stitches," her mother said. "Small even. Patient. Like counting to 10, Coraline replied, or like not answering a door that knocks in the wrong voice. Her mother looked up, puzzled by the sentence, then smiled because the sweater had become whole at the elbow. Not every understanding needs to be shared to be real. Night lowered its shoulder against the house and pushed gently. The mirror on the landing reflected stairs, banister, and the faint ghost of the new lamp thinking itself into the hall. Coraline paused and set the compact beside the big mirror for a moment, face closed. The two circles looked at one another like cousins at a reunion, neither hostile, neither sure. She pocketed the compact again and went on to bed. I made my perimeter rounds. Somewhere beyond the hydrangeas, a fox argued with hunger and won by postponing it. The fence posts kept my whisker signatures, a dotted line the moon could read if it was bored. The well did not whisper. The pink palace exhaled one long, thorough breath, the kind a house saves for after fairs and before rain. When I returned to her room, Coraline was asleep with the compact under her pillow. Not as a charm, but as a habit, like keeping a book close enough to reach for a better sentence. A stirring then, not danger, only memory, trying the door to see if habit would open it. The room cooled by half a sigh. The compact warmed by the same amount, as if the two were trading temperatures to be polite. I placed myself between both out of custom and profession. On the landing, the larger mirror softened for the briefest moment and displayed not figures. We are done with that. Only a warm smudge where gratitude does its calisthenics. The house shifted and decided to call it Lullaby, but we still wonder whether the world we chose, the one with imperfect lamps and second-hand fans and neighbours who misname you kindly, will always hold against the tug of the tidier counterfeit. Whether courage must be practised like scales, or whether it lives in us now the way marrow does. Hard to name and impossible to remove. Here are three light things to balance the scale. The crisp click when a tightened screw straightens a lampshade, and the room agrees. The way a wooden whistle finds the exact note your breath wanted. The small pride of a mended elbow you will forget until winter, when warmth thanks the stitcher without words. Before sleeping myself, I curled at the open window and let the night notch itself into my spine. A car passed, its sound neither promised nor threatened. The church bell, late and unrepentant, marked an hour with the dignity of a spoon on a mug. In the distance, the fair's last ribbon snagged on a bush and fluttered anyway. I watched until the flutter became the dark's idea of breathing. Then I blinked slow, declarative, and the house blinked back in timber and quiet. Elsewhere, the other world folded its hunger into smaller squares. Elsewhere can practice. We have practiced too. Days gathered themselves into a braid, each strand ordinary, which is the strongest rope a house can hope for. The new lamp learned the curve of the hallway and shed opinionated light without judgment. The compact lived mostly in Coraline's desk drawer, polite as a coin. School filled its pockets with fractions and handwriting and the kind of map tests where oceans are allowed to be right more than once. I kept a perimeter of fence posts and afternoon naps, patrolling the edges the way a tailor checks hems after the dress has already passed inspection. One evening, Weather decided to audition for a part in someone else's story. Clouds shouldered each other for precedence. The air tasted of tin and anticipation. Her father checked windows with the authority of a captain pretending not to love storms. "Just wind," he announced, then kissed the kettle into action. Her mother set out candles, practical superstition, and declared the evening cosy by decree. Cosy obeyed, mostly. The first thunderblow shook the Pink Palace into honesty. Houses tell you what they are during storms. This one proved itself an old actor with a good memory. It remembered which window rattles are comic and which are dignified, which floorboards creak for reassurance and which for drama. Coraline stood at the parlour window, counting the line between light and sound. She did not flinch at the bright. She had made friends with a worse kind of lightning. The power went as if someone had finally persuaded it to lie down. Candles stepped into their roles without applause. Her father offered an old camp tale, the sanitized version, fit for kitchens, and began. Once, a man set out with a map that did not include the place he most needed to find. Coraline listened with the patience of a traveller who has established customs with borders. I curled onto the back of the sofa and let thunder comb my whiskers. Every so often, lightning made me a silhouette on the wall, and I admired myself. A noise from the landing interrupted the tale. Not danger. That has its own syntax. This was the sound ivory keys make when a piano remembers it used to be a tree. The old upright in the sitting room, its top perpetually sprinkled with respectable dust, had hummed as if someone tapped its frame. Her father raised a candle and led the way. Coraline came after, compact in her pocket, the way one brings a handkerchief without telling anyone it is for courage. In the candle's circle, the piano was only furniture. A dignified box with strings, a mouthful of hammers, a stubborn G above middle C. But the mirror across from it had softened, not into spectacle, only into warmth like breath on glass that hasn't decided to fog. Coraline set the compact on the piano lid and opened it. Two small circles of darkness, who do not trust circles unless I draw them, glanced at each other. Big mirror, little mirror, the room triangulated between them and the candle. "Are we doing science?" her father joked lightly, as men do when they see ritual and prefer experiment. "Just checking for breezes," Coraline said, and her mother, who knew the difference between explanation and truth, let the sentence pass without comment. When the next thunder spoke, the candle flame bowed and then straightened. In the compact's face, for a breath, the candle doubled into a tiny galaxy. In the big mirror, the hall widened as if making room for a parade of invisible guests. 3 warmer patches gathered near the stair, and then, like people who had already said their goodbyes and remembered a last blessing, drifted up past the frame. No faces. We were finished with faces. "Draft," her father declared, satisfied. "Memory," her mother murmured, setting a steadying hand on the piano's shoulder. Coraline closed the compact, and the storm went about tidying itself into rain. After, the power returned with the bashful thud of a late guest. The kettle had kept faith. Water boiled as if the outage had been a rehearsal. They drank cocoa, which is how one congratulates an evening for not becoming a story. Coraline tucked the compact back in the drawer when she went up. That night, sleep arrived without detours. Morning put the world back on its usual axis, though the yard wore a handful of branches like sudden souvenirs. Coraline helped her father stack the fallen limbs. They made a small woodpile that smelled of rain and apologetic sap. "We should plant something," he said, eyes widening with the dangerous optimism of gardeners. "Not marigolds," Coraline decided, grinning. "Daisies?" he agreed, and nodded as if settling a border dispute. She drew a little plan in a notebook, boxes labelled with friendly names, paths drawn without tricks. When you've walked false corridors, graph paper is a restorative. At school, the map project grew elaborate. The teacher assigned them a corner of the classroom wall. The children annexed it with tape and ambition. Coraline added a modest coastline And dat, a classmate's daring an island labelled safe enough for now. She pencilled in a small, well-shaped circle on the inland, exed through it once, then twice, and wrote beside it, "Do not feed." The boy in the red jumper laughed. "What eats keys?" he asked. "Thirst," she said, and he nodded as if this solved several problems. That afternoon, Miss Spink waved them in for tea and news. "We've been asked," she announced, "to revive our dog act for the spring fete. We shall not, of course, but we shall rehearse not doing it with exquisite precision." Miss Forcible produced a scrapbook and opened to clippings rhapsodizing about canines who could count to 6 and bow in French. "A harness once broke," she whispered, triumphant. The audience clapped for the near disaster. That is theatre, the art of almost. Coraline considered how closely almost had shadowed her lately, and decided she preferred rehearsed versions. From upstairs, Mr. Bobo issued a bulletin. The mice had elected a new drum major, unanimously due to the candidate being nearest the hat, and had composed a march for umbrellas. They also say, he told Coraline, that sometimes one should hang bells on doors you don't intend to open, so you remember they exist. Practical advice, disguised as whimsy. I am partial to it. At home, her mother mended a sleeve with a seam so tidy it refused to call attention to itself. "Small stitches," she repeated. Coraline threaded a needle and tried. Her first 3 were bold as headlines, her next 10 quiet as footnotes. Improvement is the real magic trick, the kind that never draws crowds and leaves the world measurably better. Her father, in a burst of culinary diplomacy, produced a soup that agreed with the bowls and the spoons and the evening, which is more than can be said for many soups. Near dark, a knock at the door, the neighbour boy from school, a plastic folder held like a treaty. "Do you want to add rivers?" he asked, meaning to the map, meaning to the friendship. Coraline invited him in. They sprawled on the rug with markers and a ruler that had once been strict but was learning flexibility. I sat sphinx-like at the map's edge and contributed editorial silence. They argued amicably about where to place a mountain with a very satisfying name they invented on the spot. The boy drew a compass rose. Coraline made the N slightly too tall, and liked it better that way. When he left, the house felt larger by the size of a shared idea. Coraline washed the cocoa cups and set them on the rack to dry simple ceremonies, correctly performed. She touched the drawer where the compact lay and did not open it. Choice grew its own muscles and did not need exercise every hour. But we still wonder whether peace is the sum of small right actions or merely the lull between necessary storms, whether the doors we do not open remain grateful or resentful, whether a map of safe places must leave room for the kind of bravery that prefers not to be summoned and yet shows up on time. Set 3 light things beside those questions. The circle a mug leaves on a paper you have already copied, the smudged graphite stain on a thumb that says maps were made today, the thrum of gutters after rain, convincing you the house is humming along with your thinking. Late, while the pink palace practiced its steady breathing and the streetlight put its silver hand on the hedge, I took my rounds. At the well, weeds had resumed their union wages. The boards, weighted by rain and right decisions, stopped pretending to be stage traps and remembered their honest job. On the landing, the mirror returned only the staircase and a cat in possession of his evening. If a warmer patch lingered at its edge, it did so like a blessing, no longer petition, only benediction. Coraline slept with her hand under the pillow, but not holding anything. That's a posture the courageous earn, ready but not clenched. I chose the windowsill that best held the night, arranged myself as punctuation, and blinked toward the garden where the daisies would be. Elsewhere, in the lean country where pretending used to rehearse, something shifted its weight and learned the cost of waiting. We were finished teaching it. The rest it must learn from its own silence. The calendar turned a page without clearing its throat. Days continued their steady arithmetic. Walk to school, practice scales on the ordinary, return with a pocketful of sentences. I kept my rounds as if I'd signed something with my whiskers. The Pink Palace had learned the virtue of uneventful afternoons and wore them like a cardigan that finally fits. In class, the map bloomed. Rivers found the courage to be crooked. The compass rose, decided N could be taller still. Coraline and the boy in the red jumper, who had now acquired a name, shared only between them and the project-added towns sensible enough to be boring and one mountain that refused to apologize for its melodrama. We should put bells on the dangerous places, he suggested, so we hear when we're about to forget. And ribbons on the safe ones, Coraline said. I approved of a cartography that remembered sound and fabric. At home, her father arrived with a small paper sack that smelled like the inside of a hardware store metallic optimism. Bells, he announced, proud of being practical. For the back gate. For the shed. For, well, whatever else prefers notice before entry. He made tea, as if tea could notarize the decision. Her mother produced ribbon from a drawer where ribbon lives the way old sailors live near harbours. Bright, she said, choosing yellow that forgave mistakes. Between the three of them they hung bells in sensible places. On the gate that creaks when gossip comes. On the shed that hoards tools. And after a pause, in which no one pretended not to understand, on the small door in the drawing-room. It was not ceremony. It was housekeeping with a conscience. They tied a ribbon to the bell so that it would speak even to small draughts, and they set the bell free to do its work. Remember out loud. Coraline stepped back and listened. The bell remained silent, which is a kind of testimony. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible sent a note, delivered by a neighbour whose hat believed in shadows. Do come for a biscuit and the return of a story. When Coraline went, she found the rag doll headlining a plate of props for a rehearsal no one would see. Miss Spink had stitched a cheerful patch over its tidy mouth. Miss Forcible had replaced the eyes with two mismatched buttons blue and daisy yellow that refused to collude. Every object wishes to be told what it is for, Miss Spink said, pouring tea that forgave thirst. Now, this one knows. The doll, relieved of espionage, slumped into usefulness with a gratitude only cloth can manage. Coraline laughed. It was not a victory shout, only the sound you make when a chair finally stops wobbling. Upstairs, Mr. Bobo lowered news on a string like a flag of patience. The mice had composed a lullaby for Dawes. It went mostly no, no in several charming keys. They also say, he confided, that sometimes you keep a bell not for ringing, but for remembering you own the sound. He provided a tiny brass button of his own a souvenir from a uniform that never fit anyone and presented it to Coraline as a medal. She pinned it inside her sweater where only knowledge could feel it. On the way home, we passed the well. We do not avoid it. We greet it with the kind of politeness one offers a retired actor. Thank you for your service. Please do not return to the stage unless the play requires it. The boards did not move. The weeds held their line. The air above it tasted uninteresting. This is the flavour of success. Back in the drawing room, the bell stared at the small door with a composure that verged on smug. Coraline touched the ribbon and then did not. She took the compact from the drawer, opened it to confirm that a reflection had no budget for mischief, and set it on the mantel beside the empty snow globe, which now served as a reminder that some traps can be turned into glass and kept as lessons. Her mother dusted the mantel with the respectful briskness of someone tidying a shelf of stories. Her father installed a new screw in the lamp and declared its tilt purposeful. That evening, the neighbour boy came by with questions about estuaries and a tolerance for cocoa. They drew a final river on the class map that allowed for floods and forgiveness. Should we put a bell symbol where the old well would be? He asked, pencil hovered. No, Coraline said, smiling. Just a daisy. He shrugged, adopted the daisy, and made it a cheerful dot on the page. Small, bright refusal to be haunted. After he left, the house dimmed itself to night and then, finally, to sleep. I remained awake in the way cats manage, a coil with a pilot light. Sometime after midnight, when staircases like to dream of being snakes and windows, persuade themselves they are harps, the bell on the small door gave a sound. Not a ring. A question. It sounded like the word almost makes when it wants to be yes. Coraline sat up, not frightened so much as clarified. She crossed the hall in bare feet. Small, patient animals, and stood in the drawing room. I took my place at her ankle. The bell rested again, honest as metal at room temperature. Draught? She asked the air, and the air applied for that job. She set 2 fingers on the ribbon. No pull from beyond, only the steady weight of cloth and gravity. She opened the compact and held it toward the seam. A candle would have fogged it with breath. The door did not. She closed the compact and laughed once, quietly, as one laughs at a habit that has decided to live elsewhere. Thank you, she told the bell, because gratitude sharpens allies. Then she went back to bed and, on the way, touched the mirror's frame as if touching the shoulder of an old friend. The mirror offered nothing but her hair asking for morning, face interviewing sleep and the faintest warmth at the edge, like a cat deciding not to jump. Permission withdrawn by both sides. Morning dressed itself in a sweater of cloud. Her father practiced courage with breakfast eggs that did not panic, toast with ambition but no smoke. Her mother made a list labelled planting minor repairs, cakes, which is exactly how goodness gets scheduled. Coraline added daisies in a printing newly obedient to straight lines, and below it return stone, which surprised even her. After a pause, she crossed out return and wrote rest. The stone had done its seeing. Even instruments deserve naps. We walked to Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's with the stone wrapped in a corner of the picnic cloth, the way you carry something that is not fragile, but has earned softness. The actresses received it as one receives an old castmate. A kiss blown in the right direction, a joke that refuses rehearsal. We'll keep it by the door, Miss Spink promised. not to be suspicious, only to remember we could be. Miss Forcible tucked it into a blue cup that once held roses that disapproved of winter. "Every home is improved by an honest eye in a teacup," she declared. I agreed. Teacups have excellent posture. In the afternoon, Coraline and her parents knelt in the damp geometry of the garden and planted the daisies. Her father measured nothing and got away with it. Her mother set the spacing by instinct, trained in closets and curtains. Coraline pressed each root into its rectangle of dirt, as if tucking a story into bed. No faces appeared in the flower beds. Dirt smelled like dirt. The sky remembered not to be ominous. After washing hands that looked temporarily older earth, does that Coraline wrote a note in her notebook. Bells hung, stone rested, daisies in. She added a small drawing of the small door with a ribboned bell, and, beside it, a cat with opinions. I pretended not to notice the whiskers were too long. Evening offered soup, then quiet. Coraline sat at the window, with the compact closed on the sill like a coin you choose not to spend. We watched the street invent reasons to yawn, a late bicycle, a neighbour negotiating grocery bags, the day's last bird claiming the hedge as a bedtime story. She asked, "Will you go soon?" Children understand departure even before anyone has packed. I stretched, unhurried. "Elsewhere is a wide country," I said, "but I like this border." She nodded. "You can go and still be here," she decided, inventing an algebra for company. It was correct, but we still wonder whether safety remains safety when we stop checking its pulse, whether bells grow lonely if never rung, and whether the courage stored in drawers beneath compact mirrors and tins of cheerful buttons keeps its edge or whether it blunts into kindness, which might be better steel. 3 small lightnesses to set against those heavy musings. The bright, innocent chime of a bell when you dust it on purpose. The way damp earth under fingernails keeps the afternoon with you until the sink forgives it. The cat who walks the long way around your legs before sitting, just to remind you that circles can be vows rather than traps. Night arrived with none of its old ambitions. The bell slept. The mirror kept to its trade. In the corner of the garden, daisies rehearsed dawn. I patrolled once, twice, for the pleasure of writing the edges with my fur. Then I took the windowsill that understands cats and arranged myself like punctuation at the end of a paragraph that knows what it meant. Elsewhere rustled, as elsewheres do. Here answered steady. Coraline dreamed of maps where the monsters had been renamed weather. When she woke, she would find that the world, stitched patiently along its seam, held. Days kept their end of the bargain, showing up one after the other dressed as themselves. The daisies took to their new addresses with neighbourly optimism. The bell on the small door acquired a thin halo of dust where fingers didn't touch it, which is how a house displays restraint. Coraline's handwriting domesticated its own angles. I continued my border work, auditing fence posts, renewing my treaties with the hedges, taking a census of sun patches. Saturday nominated itself for chores. Her mother produced a basket for things that were almost where they belonged. Her father armed himself with a screwdriver's parliament. Coraline gathered the week's paper into stacks maps for school, lists for kitchens, notes that had served their sentences. From the drawer she lifted the compact, looked at her reflection with the impartiality of a customs officer, and returned it to the mantel beside the empty snow globe. The two circles sat like punctuation marks, one period for an ended danger, one full stop reminding everyone how final looks in glass, a knock too polite for trouble, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible at the door, shawls arranged as if they'd rehearsed the weather. A matinee, Miss Forcible announced, with the gravitas of proclaiming a national holiday. A private one, Miss Spink added, in gratitude to certain recent heroes. They swept Coraline and her parents down to the basement that isn't. The stage had become intimate, all velvet and candle glow, the exact size of a thank you. The program was a miniature of their pasts, a duet about dogs with impeccable manners, a sketch in which a parasol debated meteorology with a hatpin, a dance that remembered the rumour of waves without demanding an ocean. Midway, they brought out the rag doll, wearing its patch and its mismatched eyes. It passed from hand to hand as a prop that understood itself. "Observe," Miss Spink cried, "how even a silent partner can tell the truth if you move it right." The audience, 4 humans, and 1 cat applauded, as if the room needed a reason to keep being a room. Coraline smiled in the small, satisfied way that does not ask the world to notice. Her mother's eyes shone, less from clapping than from relief dressed as pride. Her father laughed with his whole face, the kind of laugh that puts furniture at ease. After curtain tea appeared with a theology of biscuits. "To your continuing unadventures," Miss Forcible toasted, lifting a cup. "May they be plentiful." Miss Spink read the leaves with benevolent laziness. "I see hemming," she pronounced, "and cake, and a parcel, and a day when you are exactly on time." "And a dog," Miss Forcible added, in case a prediction lacked charm. Coraline tucked these into the pocket where she keeps afternoons. On the walk home, we passed Mr. Bobo's attic window. He dangled a new banner, lettered in mouse chancery, "Practice good quiet." "They say," he called down, "that parades are nice, but corridors are nicer when they do nothing." I blinked up at him slowly, old language for agreement. The mice played 3 notes that sounded like a bow done correctly. In the garden, the daisies rehearsed, smiling. Coraline knelt to press soil around a stem that had ideas about independence. Dirt lodged under her nails, then admitted it was home for now. Her parents brought out a bench that had been leaning in the shed, learning patience. It took its place near the path, as if it had always known it was furniture. They sat together with the loose geometry of people who will never know precisely which room tried to keep them, and who have decided to forgive the architecture of memory. I took the high rail and surveyed our small nation, tail flagging mild victories. The post arrived, bills, a flyer promising miracle mops, a brown paper parcel with Coraline's name written as if the sender had learned each letter from a careful teacher. Inside, a spiral notebook with an embossed compass rose and a card that said, "In a hand that refused fuss, for maps you make yourself." No signature, only a scrap of ribbon tucked under the cover. Daisy yellow. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible denied knowledge with the sincerity of actresses delivering truthful lines. Mr. Bobo swore on the dignity of mouse drummers. Coraline accepted the mystery. Some gifts are earned. Their return address is simply the world taking note. She opened to the first page and drew the pink palace not as it looks, but as it behaves. The porch, listening. The stair, reconsidering each step. The drawing-room door, with its ribboned bell, practicing silence like an instrument. Above the garden she sketched a cluster of small circles, not quite stars' gratitudes that had outlived their faces. On the back path she added a cat with opinions, which is to say, me. The likeness was flattering. I am handsome in the language of charcoal. Afternoon drifted toward the hour when the kettle begins to think of itself. Her father called Coraline in to measure flour. Her mother balanced the scales between recipe and memory. The cake rose as if someone had told it a secret about levitation and manners. They ate it warm, which is how truth ought to be served when possible. "Sensible cake," her father declared, and for once no one argued with sense. I stole a crumb the size of a decision from the plate. It did not scold me. Near dusk, the neighbour boy knocked, breathless with news of the classroom map. "We get to present," he announced, holding his plastic folder like an envoy who has learned the word delegation. They sprawled on the rug and rehearsed the story of rivers and maybes. He pointed to their daisy dot. "Why a flower there?" "Because bells can be loud," Coraline said. "Some places prefer kindness." He accepted this as if the world had always organized itself that way, which, with practice, it might. When he left, the house transitioned to evening with the confidence of a theatre between acts. Down the hall, the new lamp, screw tightened, offered its opinionated light. The compact on the mantel held its tongue. The snow globe was only weather in glass. Coraline's mother mended a crooked hem. Her father tested a chair and found it still trustworthy. Coraline wrote at the bottom of a notebook page, "Today was not about any door." It is a sentence history books rarely reward and the one houses most crave. Later, a wind drafted through the eaves with the harmless ambition of someone whistling on a bicycle. The bell did not ring. Coraline paused by the small door anyway, a ritual reduced to good posture. She set 2 fingers to the ribbon, not to test, only to thank. In the big mirror, the landing behaved. If warmth hovered near the frame, it did so like old perfume present, unpersuasive. She went to bed and set the compass notebook on the table where morning could find it. I took the long window and watched the garden practice being dark without giving up its edges. The well kept its hat. The boards stayed literal. A fox crossed the hedge line with professional discretion. Elsewhere tugged once at the seam of the world, and receiving no answer, sulked back into itself. I approved. Approval, as you know by now, looks like staying until the house falls asleep and then a little longer. But we still wonder whether peace requires guardians or only witnesses. Whether the courage folded in a drawer beside cheerful buttons and a compact mirror keeps its temper honed for years, or gradually trades sharpness for gentleness, which might be the better blade when the work is living. Whether maps of safe places should leave one blank corner, not for monsters, but for mercy that has not learned its shape yet. Set beside those doubts 3 light things: the satisfying thrum of a tightened string when a broom at last stops rattling, the stern, cheerful plink a bell makes when you dust it and it forgives you, the way fresh cake, cut while too warm, falls apart exactly enough to insist you eat the crumbs together. Before dawn, a small sound woke me. Not danger, not almost only the soft chime of the bell answering a change in weather, followed by stillness so complete the house could have been thinking. I padded to the drawing room. The ribbon hung the way ribbons hang when they have nothing to announce. Coraline, bare feet soundless, came and stood beside me, not to check, but to share the quiet. "We're all right," she said, and the sentence required no audience. The bell agreed by remaining silent. We returned to sleep as if returning from a brief border crossing with passports stamped peace. The class map, at last, was ready to be shown to the world that fit inside a classroom. Paper seas lay in their places, with the calm of things no one intended to cross today. Coraline and the boy in the red jumper, Ollie, cartographer, diplomat of crayons, took the front. She spoke steadily about rivers that refuse to be straight and coasts that keep changing their minds. He showed the compass rose and explained why the N was taller now. Because sometimes knowing where north is needs a little more emphasis. There was a daisy on the inland only, a dot of yellow, but it lifted its small brightness into the room. When a child in the second row raised a hand to ask why here and not there, Coraline said, "Because kindness belongs somewhere," and the teacher wrote it on the board as if it were geography. After school, errands braided themselves into a walk. A paper bag of flour that chuffed against her leg, a library book with its private weather, a packet of daisy seeds because hope prefers overdoing. We visited Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, who had baked a lemon cake so sure of itself it forgave the knife. "Brava, brava," Miss Forcible said when she heard about the presentation. "You see how applause can be quiet and still count." Miss Spink examined a tea leaf, raised an eyebrow, and predicted a nap, a letter, and a future. A good, broad fortune you could wear with any outfit. Upstairs, Mr. Bobo released on a string a tiny paper rosette the mice had cut with scandalous neatness. "They say, 'Map brave,'" he translated, which covered the essentials. Evening folded softly. Her father coaxed the new recipe to success without sacrificing his soul to instructions. Her mother declared the bell in the drawing room decorative, which is a promotion bells rarely earn. Coraline set her library book on the arm of the chair and watched day trade hats with night. I took the windowsill that lets you see both the garden and your reflection, depending on what kind of truth you require. The daisies rehearsed a small, stubborn glow. The bell kept its silence as if it were performing a piece called Good Quiet, in a house that liked the tune. Later, she opened the compass notebook and drew the corridor as it had been, a black narrowing with wallpaper patterns that refused to repeat honestly. She drew, opposite it, a bell on a ribbon, a daisy, and a cat. She wrote beneath, "Map of elsewhere, do not reopen." Then she shut the book with a firmness that did not need to be angry. Some closures are simply good carpentry, but we still wonder whether the doors we've closed become gentler over time, whether counterfeit kindness ever learns repentance, whether bravery, once used, refills itself from secret springs, or whether it must be topped up by small, ordinary acts, mending a sleeve, tightening a screw, planting 3 silly flowers because you have the space. We wonder whether seeing and being seen can share a table without the buttons appearing, whether safety must always sound like a bell, or can sometimes look like a daisy. For lightness, because thought benefits from snacks, notice the relief of warm socks straight from the line, the impolite joy when jam finds the exact corner of toast. It was born to sweeten, the way a pencil behind the ear makes even an ordinary face look like it is ready to draw a better map. Toward night, a letter arrived, stamped from nowhere in particular. Inside, a single sentence printed with schoolroom care. "Thank you for letting us go. No signature, no need." Coraline set it on the mantel between the compact and the empty snow globe. Her mother, dusting, passed it with a respectful quickness. Her father paused, smiled without asking, and straightened the lamp that liked to tilt as if it were bowing to the audience. We stepped out to the garden before bed. Air like clean linen. The daisies, unafraid of darkness, kept their pale attentions pointed upward. Coraline touched one with a fingertip, the way you greet a thought you intend to remember. "You'll go, won't you?" she asked, minute complaint. Not trap, just the question children offer the parts of the world they have learned cannot be kept. "Somewhere is a large profession," I said. "But I leave signatures." She looked at the fence posts, the rail, the path's edges where my whiskers had said yes to the borders. "I can read them," she told me. And she could. Inside, the mirror on the landing reflected stairs, rail, lamp, a girl on her way to bed. For a moment only that the glass warmed at the edges, a soft temperature like breath on a palm. Not faces now. We had earned our way past faces. Only blessing. Coraline touched the frame and did not speak. The silence in the pink palace that followed was the kind you keep because it fits. Half the night is made of corridors people refuse to take. It passed. In the morning, the bell gleamed with dust you couldn't see unless you loved it. The kitchen light glossed the table into cheerful honesty. Her father announced porridge with the tone of a man who has made peace with oats. Her mother found the jam without opening 3 wrong cabinets. Coraline ate and made a face, and then ate again, because peace isn't a license to be dramatic. I accompanied her to the door for school, pausing where paw meets step. She looked down. "You are a good witness," she said. It was accurate. Cats are the world's footnotes. We keep the record of what happened when the sentences think they are finished. She scratched carefully behind my ear. "If you're elsewhere," she added, "come back when it's clever to." "It usually is," I said, and we parted. She to halls with bells that mean arithmetic, I to borders that need reminding they are loved. The last 500 words begin slowly, because endings are a craft, and time deserves good workmanship. The Pink Palace learned, at last, to settle its weight on the hill without apologizing for the creaks. A house, after all, is a stitched thing. Pipes and wires and timber and the spaces between. A garment for weather and sleep. In the evenings that followed, the bell on the drawing-room door became a small star no one needed to consult to know where north was. Coraline would pass and set 2 fingers to the ribbon thanks, not test, and go on to her homework. Her book. Her quiet drawing of a coastline that no longer argued with her hand. I took to longer patrols. Elsewhere requires tending. Even in neighborhoods where doors stay doors, there are alleys that forget their names and roofs that benefit from a cat's grammar. From gutters, I watched the town decide itself each dusk, the bakery turning its breath into sugar, the church sorting bells by seriousness, the small shop windows inventing reasons to glow a little longer. When I returned to the Pink Palace, the hedges remembered the shape of my shoulder, and the back step remembered the exact weight of my paws before visiting. Sometimes late, the landing mirror would hold the room a heartbeat longer, as if it wanted to savour this version of the story. The lamp's agreeable angle, the patient banister, the small door with its chased ribbon, and in that heartbeat, at the glass's edge, a warmth like a cat deciding to stay would bloom and fade. Blessings do not demand witnesses, but they wear them well. And Coraline, she grew the way good sentences do when the writer stops showing off. Her bravery redistributed itself into practical habits, asking questions when answers strutted, counting again when numbers lied, offering a daisy on a map where a bell might once have clanged. She laughed more with her parents, not because jokes improved, but because relief had somewhere to sit. In class, she learned the virtue of revising. At home, she made small, even stitches in places no passer-by would notice, and felt the private glow of work done right. When rain came, it tapped the roof without ambition. When sun came, it laundered the garden's colours and hung them out to dry. On some afternoons, a dog named Kenneth Hamish bestrode the hedge line with municipal certainty, and Coraline gifted him a biscuit in lieu of a title. Miss Spink read the future lightly, and then read the tea more carefully, just in case. Miss Forcible rehearsed the art of not reviving a dog act with fervour. Mr. Bobo's mice retired the banner and learned a lullaby consisting of enough sung 3 different ways. The well kept its hat of weeds, and silence earned its pension. There were moments the tilt of a shadow, the way a draught tests a hinge when you or I might have stiffened. Coraline would lift her compact, look into the clean, unastonished face of herself, and put it away. Or she would touch the bell, not to wake it, only to remind it that she remembered. Or she would kneel by the daisies, pinch away a spent bloom, and offer the plant the space to make another. Doors are not the only things that can be taught manners. One evening, after cake that apologized to no one, she climbed the stairs and paused at the landing. "Good night," she told the mirror, and the mirror clear, polite returned her. She touched the frame with the gravity of a blessing given by a layperson to a holy thing that has decided to live at home. Her parents' voices drifted from below, domestic music. I sat on the rail and allowed the scene to soften at the edges, the way a photograph reconciles itself to memory. You expect me to leave now because narrators have a way of stepping into the fog once the lights come up. Perhaps I will. Elsewhere remains employable. But look, the Pink Palace keeps a place on the sill in the room where the compass notebook sleeps. If the sun pours itself there, it forms a small country exact to my shape. Some mornings you would swear you heard a faint thump, as if a cat had landed lightly from a height measured in stories rather than feet. And the bell keeps the best time of all, ringing only for dust, which is how a house knows it is alive and not a museum. If you should pass by quietly, the hedge likes calm and pause at the gate. You will see a girl who has taught her courage to wear work clothes. You will see a house that has learned to hold its breath only when laughter needs the air. You may, if the light behaves, catch 3 nearly faces in the mirror that are not faces at all, only the warmer mood of gratitude that refuses to darken. And on the map taped above the desk, you will see the daisy, bright dot of mercy, where bells might once have insisted. I have told you what I saw, and the parts I chose not to pounce. The rest is yours, the corridors you decline, the bells you hang, the daisies you plant, where fear would prefer metal. Sleep if it is night where you are, or step into the sun if it is morning. Either way, keep an ear for ordinary silences and a pocket for small, honest tools. There are doors in every weather, but most of them are only wood. Listen, Lean, do you hear it? Nothing. Good. That is the bell minding its manners.